Imagine, if you will, a room deep beneath the earth, a place of shadowed grandeur, carved from cold, dark stone that has witnessed 1,000 years of secrets. There are no windows to the sunlit world above. Instead, great, enchanted panes of glass look out into the depths of the Black Lake. A soft, green-silver light filters through, dancing across ornate silver tables and high-backed chairs. In the gloom, you might see the flicker of a Grindylows eyes, or the slow, graceful glide of the giant squid's tentacle. A fire of emerald flames crackles in a vast carved fireplace, its warmth a defiant counterpoint to the chill of the dungeons. This is the Slytherin common room, a sanctuary, a crucible, a fortress. Listen, can you hear it? Beyond the crackle of the fire and the gentle lapping of the lake against the glass, there is another sound. It is the whisper of ambition. It is the lifeblood of this house, the current that runs through every student who has ever worn the silver and green. Ambition, a word so often misunderstood, so easily condemned. To many, it is a synonym for greed, for a ruthless, single-minded pursuit of power at any cost. And for some who have walked these halls, that has been true. Their stories are etched into the very fabric of wizarding history, cautionary tales written in dark ink. But that is only one side of the story. It is the simplest reading of a far more complex text. Ambition is not inherently good or evil. It is a tool. It is a blade. In the hands of a butcher, it can maim and destroy. But in the hands of a surgeon, it can heal. It can protect. It can build. The students sorted into this house are chosen for their potential, for the fire of determination that burns within them. They are resourceful. They are cunning. They possess a fierce instinct for self-preservation and a deep-seated desire to lead, to achieve, to leave a mark upon the world. They understand that greatness is not given, it is seized. This is the central paradox of House Slytherin. It is a house that has produced more dark witches and wizards than any other. Yet it is also the house of Merlin, the most famous wizard in history, whose code of chivalry and use of magic for the common good shaped the very foundations of the wizarding world in Britain. It is the house that gave rise to Lord Voldemort, the greatest Dark Lord of all time. And it is the house that produced Severus Snape, the man who sacrificed everything to destroy him, and Narcissa Malfoy, the mother whose love proved more powerful than the Dark Lord's most terrible curse. So, we must ask the question, what is the true nature of ambition? What does it cost to want more, to strive for greatness? And what happens when that ambition is not for personal gain alone, but for the protection of a family, the preservation of a legacy, or the salvation of a world that despises you? This history is not an apology. It is an exploration. We will journey back to the very founding of Hogwarts, to a time of myth and legend, when 4 great founders came together with a shared dream. We will uncover the truth behind the Chamber of Secrets, a secret born of fear and pride. We will trace the threads of a single bloodline through centuries of glory and decay, culminating in a squalid shack where a legacy of greatness festered into madness. We will follow the path of a lonely orphan boy who found a home in these dungeons, a boy whose ambition twisted into a terrifying obsession with immortality. We will walk the halls with generations of students, from the powerful and the privileged to the outcasts and the overlooked. We will witness their triumphs and their failures, their acts of great cruelty and their moments of unexpected courage. Forget the caricatures. Forget the simple labels of good and evil. The story of Slytherin is the story of the human heart in all its complexity. It is about the choices we make when faced with power, the lines we draw, and the price we are willing to pay for what we desire most. It is a story of legacy, of the burdens and the gifts passed down through generations. And ultimately, it is a story of greatness, in all its light and all its shadow. The Serpent is a creature of immense power and ancient wisdom. It sheds its skin to grow. It is a symbol of rebirth, of transformation. Let us now watch it shed its skin once more and see the truth that lies beneath. Part 1. Founding and First Principles. Chapter: Salazar Slytherin, the First Serpent. To understand the house, we must first understand the man, Salazar Slytherin. His name resonates through a millennium of magical history, a name synonymous with power, purity, and a dark, enduring secret. But before the legend, there was a man, a wizard of prodigious talent, born in the fenlands of eastern England, a marshy, waterlogged landscape of mist and hidden depths, a place where the veil between the magical and the mundane was said to be thin. The historical records from this era, the 10th century, are sparse, pieced together from school legends and ancient magical accounts. What the books tell us is that he was a master of legilimency, the art of reading minds, and one of the first recorded Parselmouths, a speaker of the language of serpents. This latter skill was rare and often viewed with suspicion. It connected him to a primal, ancient magic, a magic that was misunderstood by many. But for Salazar, it was a gift, a sign of his unique connection to the magical world. He saw it not as a curse, but as a mark of a special lineage. This belief would become the cornerstone of his philosophy. In a time when wizards were hunted and feared by their non-magical neighbors, Salazar Slytherin, along with 3 other powerful magic users of his day, Godric Gryffindor, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Helga Hufflepuff, conceived of a radical idea. They would create a sanctuary, a school where young witches and wizards could learn to control their powers, safe from persecution. They would build Hogwarts. From the very beginning, the 4 founders, though united in their goal, had different ideas about how to achieve it. Helga Hufflepuff believed that any child with a spark of magic deserved a place. Rowena Ravenclaw prized intellect above all else, seeking only the sharpest minds. Godric Gryffindor valued bravery and daring. And Salazar Slytherin, shaped by an era of intense persecution, held a different view. He had witnessed firsthand the dangers that Muggles posed. He had seen magic betrayed, witches and wizards hunted down because of careless words or misplaced trust. He argued that the school should be a bastion for the magical community, and that meant preserving its purity. His argument, in his own mind, was one of safety and preservation. How could they trust students of Muggle parentage not to betray their secrets to the outside world? How could a child raised without any knowledge of their heritage truly understand the weight and responsibility of magic? To Salazar, it was a matter of prudence. He believed that magical ability was passed down through blood, and that those from long lines of witches and wizards, the purebloods, were more trustworthy, more talented, and more deserving of the precious knowledge that would be shared within Hogwarts walls. This was the seed of the great conflict. Godric Gryffindor, his closest friend, argued passionately against him. To Godric, courage was not a matter of bloodline. It was a matter of character. He saw Salazar's caution as prejudice, his desire for purity as a form of bigotry. Their friendship, once the bedrock of the school's founding, began to fracture under the weight of this fundamental disagreement. Rowena and Helga, for their part, tried to mediate, but the chasm between the 2 men was too deep. Salazar was not merely a theorist, he was a builder, a creator of powerful and lasting magic. As the castle took shape, he poured his own unique brand of magic into its foundations. Deep beneath the dungeons, in a place only he could access, he constructed a hidden chamber, the Chamber of Secrets. This was his legacy, his failsafe. The school's oldest legends, as recorded in Hogwarts: A History, tell us that he built it as a final, desperate measure. If his vision for the school was ever truly threatened, if his belief in the supremacy of pure-blood wizards was ever abandoned, the chamber would be opened, and the monster within would be unleashed to purge the school of those he deemed unworthy to study magic. The monster was a basilisk, the king of serpents, a creature of immense dark magic, born from a chicken's egg hatched beneath a toad. It could kill with a single glance, and could only be controlled by a parcel mouth. It was the ultimate expression of Salazar's power and his paranoia. It was a weapon designed to protect his ideals, hidden away until his true heir, a descendant who shared his abilities, could return to the school and finish his noble work. Eventually, the conflict with the other founders reached a breaking point. The arguments with Gryffindor became too bitter, the philosophical divide too wide. Salazar Slytherin, feeling betrayed and isolated, chose to leave the school he had helped to build. He walked away from Hogwarts, but he did not leave it unprotected. He left behind his chamber, his monster, and his legacy. It is easy to cast Salazar as the villain of this story. His beliefs were undoubtedly elitist and discriminatory. His methods were extreme, but to do so is to ignore the context of his time. He lived in an age of fear. His desire to protect the magical world, while twisted, was born from a genuine concern for its survival. He saw the mixing of magical and muggle blood not just as a dilution of power, but as a security risk, a gateway for betrayal and destruction. His ambition was for the preservation of his people, as he defined them. The tragedy of Salazar Slytherin is that his methods ultimately sowed more division and hatred than the persecution he sought to escape. He sought to build a fortress, but in doing so, he laid the foundation for a prison of prejudice that would haunt his own house for centuries to come. His legacy is a testament to the danger of allowing fear to masquerade as wisdom, and of allowing the pursuit of purity to curdle into a doctrine of hate. Chapter: House Symbols, the Common Room, and Early Customs. Every aspect of Slytherin House, from its emblem to its location, is a direct reflection of the founder's character and philosophy. The chosen colors, emerald green and silver, evoke the waters of the Fenlands where Salazar was born, and the scales of the serpent, his most potent symbol. The serpent itself is a creature of duality. In many cultures, it represents evil, temptation, and deceit, but it is also a symbol of wisdom, of healing, and of rebirth. The serpent can be deadly, but it is also patient, cunning, and fiercely protective of its own. It moves with a silent grace, striking only when necessary. This duality lies at the heart of the Slytherin identity. The location of the common room is no accident. While the other three houses reside in the upper towers of the castle, reaching for the sky, Slytherin is situated deep in the dungeons, with its windows looking out into the cold, dark waters of the Black Lake. This is not a place of punishment. It is a place of strategic advantage. It is hidden, secure, and defensible. It insulates its inhabitants from the rest of the school, fostering a sense of unity and shared identity. The green-tinged light that fills the room creates an atmosphere of quiet contemplation and whispered conspiracy. It is a space that encourages introspection, strategic thinking, and a certain detachment from the clamor and chaos of the world above. The architecture itself is imposing. The common room is a long, low, underground chamber with rough stone walls and ceiling, from which hang greenish, circular lamps on chains. The fireplace is an elaborate, carved masterpiece, and the furniture is grand and ancient. It is a room that speaks of old money, of ancient lineage, and of an unapologetic embrace of power. It is designed to awe, to intimidate, and to remind those within of the weight of their heritage. In the early centuries of Hogwarts, the customs within the house were shaped by these surroundings and by the founders' core values. Slytherins were taught to be self-reliant. They were encouraged to form alliances, but to always be wary of betrayal. The concept of brotherhood and sisterhood within the house was paramount. They were a family, set apart from the rest of the school, and they were expected to look out for one another. This loyalty, however, was often conditional. It was a pragmatic loyalty, based on mutual benefit and shared goals. Betrayal of the house itself was unforgivable, but internal power struggles were a constant feature of Slytherin life. The traits prized by the Sorting Hat for Slytherin students were ambition, cunning, leadership, and resourcefulness. These were not seen as negative qualities. They were essential tools for survival and success in a world that was often hostile. A Slytherin was expected to be a leader, to take charge, and to achieve their goals by any means necessary. The morality of those means was often a secondary consideration. The primary focus was on the outcome. Did you succeed? Did you win? Mentorship was a key part of the early house culture. Older students would take younger ones under their wing, guiding them through the complex social and political landscape of Hogwarts. These relationships were not always altruistic. They were often a way for older students to build a network of loyal followers, a power base that would serve them well, both within the castle and in the wider wizarding world after graduation. This practice of patronage and networking became a hallmark of the house, with influential Slytherin families often using their connections to secure positions of power and influence for their children and their allies. From its very inception, Slytherin House was defined by a sense of exceptionalism. Its members were taught to believe that they were different, that they were destined for greatness. They were the heirs of Salazar Slytherin, and they carried his legacy, for better or for worse. This bred a powerful sense of pride, but also a deep-seated suspicion of outsiders. The rivalry with Gryffindor, in particular, was ingrained from the very first generation of students. It was more than just a school competition. It was a continuation of the philosophical war between the founders. Gryffindors were seen as reckless, arrogant, and self-righteous. Slytherins, in turn, were seen as dark, deceitful, and untrustworthy. These stereotypes, born 1,000 years ago, would prove to be incredibly resilient, shaping the perceptions and the realities of both houses for a millennium. The common room by the lake was not just a living space. It was the heart of a nation within a nation, a place where a very specific and powerful vision of the wizarding world was nurtured and passed down through the generations. Part 2. The Heir and the Chamber. Chapter. The Legend Evolves. For centuries after Salazar Slytherin's departure, the Chamber of Secrets was nothing more than a ghost story, a legend whispered by students in darkened corridors, a cautionary tale told to frighten first years. Most heads of the school and senior faculty dismissed it as a myth. They searched the castle repeatedly, using every detection spell at their disposal, but found no trace of it. The very idea of a hidden chamber containing a monster seemed preposterous, a relic of a more superstitious age. Hogwarts, a history, mentions the legend but treats it with academic skepticism, noting the lack of any concrete evidence. And yet the story refused to die. It persisted, passed down through generations of Slytherin students who treated it not as a myth, but as a promise. For them, it was a symbol of their founder's enduring power and a testament to the righteousness of his cause. They believed that the heir would one day return, and the school would be cleansed. This belief became a central part of the house's hidden curriculum, a secret doctrine that reinforced their sense of superiority and their distrust of Muggleborns. Over the centuries, the legend was embellished. Stories were told of strange noises heard in the castle's plumbing, of mysterious disappearances that were never solved. Every unusual event was seen as a potential sign, a hint that the chamber was real and that its guardian was stirring. The details of the monster within became more and more fantastical. Some said it was a dragon, others a manticore. Only the oldest Slytherin families, those who could trace their lineage back to Salazar's time, seemed to retain the kernel of truth, that the monster was a serpent, and that only a Parselmouth could control it. The very secrecy of the chamber was a testament to Salazar's genius. He did not build a simple hidden room. He wove its entrance into the very fabric of the castle's infrastructure, concealing it behind a complex series of magical and physical locks that were keyed to a specific, rare magical ability. The entrance was located in a girl's bathroom, a place of such mundane utility that no one would ever think to look for a gateway to ancient, dark magic. The key was not a word of power or a complex wand movement, but a single hissed word in Parseltongue. It was a lock that only a true descendant of Slytherin could open. The purpose of the chamber, in the minds of those who believed in it, also evolved. For Salazar, it was a weapon of last resort, a tool to enforce his educational philosophy. But for later generations, it became something more. It became a symbol of righteous vengeance. The persecution that Salazar had feared did not disappear. The wizarding world remained hidden, and the prejudice against Muggleborns, or mudbloods as the derogatory term became, festered within certain pureblood circles. For these families, the Chamber of Secrets represented a future reckoning, a day when the wizarding world would be purified and returned to its rightful rulers. The historical record is mostly silent on any attempts to open the chamber before the 20th century. It is possible that other descendants of Slytherin attended Hogwarts over the years, but if they tried to find the chamber, they either failed or their actions were lost to history. The specific knowledge of its location and the nature of the monster seems to have been diluted or forgotten over time. Even within the Slytherin line, it existed as a powerful idea, a cultural touchstone for the house, but its physical reality remained dormant. This long period of inactivity lulled the rest of the wizarding world into a false sense of security. The story of the chamber became a quaint piece of Hogwarts folklore, but the danger was not gone. It was merely sleeping. The chamber, the monster, and the ideology that created them were waiting patiently for the one heir who possessed not only the blood and the ability, but also the ambition and the ruthlessness to awaken them. The legend was not just a story, it was a prophecy, biding its time, and in the 20th century, that time would finally come. The whispers would become a roar, and the myth would become a terrifying reality. Chapter: Lineage Threads. The power of Slytherin House was always deeply intertwined with the concept of lineage. While other houses valued traits that could be found in any witch or wizard, regardless of their background, Slytherin placed a unique emphasis on blood. To be a Slytherin was, for many, to be part of an ancient and noble family, to carry a name that stretched back through generations of magical history. This focus on ancestry was both a source of immense pride and a catalyst for profound decay. Salazar Slytherin himself had children, ensuring that his rare gift of Parseltongue and his pure blood ideology would be passed down. For centuries, his descendants maintained their status and influence within the wizarding community. They were a proud and powerful line, known for their ambition, their political maneuvering, and their magical skill. They guarded their heritage fiercely, marrying only within a small circle of other pureblood families to keep their bloodline pure. This practice of intermarriage, common among families like the Blacks, the Malfoys, and the Lestranges, was intended to preserve their magical strength and social standing. However, it often had the opposite effect. Over time, this limited gene pool led to instability, both magical and mental. Power became concentrated, but so did cruelty and arrogance. The Slytherin line, once a symbol of magical nobility, began to tarnish. By the 19th century, the family was known as the Gaunts. The name itself, meaning thin and haggard, was a grim reflection of their diminished state. The Gaunts were the last known descendants of Salazar Slytherin. They lived in abject poverty and squalor in a dilapidated shack in the small village of Little Hangleton. Yet, their pride remained as fierce and unyielding as ever. They clung to their heritage with a desperate ferocity, seeing it as the only thing of value they had left. They spoke Parseltongue to each other, not just as a magical language, but as a secret code, a way of setting themselves apart from the common wizards and muggles they despised. Their connection to their great ancestor was not just one of blood. They were the custodians of his last remaining heirlooms. The first was a heavy gold locket, engraved with a serpentine, Circe. This was Salazar Slytherin's own locket, a powerful artifact that had been passed down through the generations. The second was a black stone ring, set with a symbol that would later be identified as the Mark of the Deathly Hallows, but which the Gaunts believed to be the Peveril coat of arms, further proof of their noble ancestry. Cadmus Peveril, one of a trio of legendary brothers, was also an ancestor, meaning the Gaunt bloodline was a confluence of two ancient and powerful magical families. These heirlooms were more than just jewelry. They were tangible links to a glorious past. They were physical proof that the Gaunts were not just poor, violent outcasts. They were magical royalty. They embodied the weight of ancestry, the idea that the past is never truly past. For the Gaunts, this legacy was a crushing burden. It trapped them in a cycle of resentment and bitterness. They defined themselves not by who they were, but by who their ancestors had been. Their ambition, once the driving force of their line, had curdled into a pathetic, impotent rage against a world that no longer recognized their greatness. The story of the Gaunts is a tragic illustration of the dangers of Slytherin's ideology. The obsession with blood purity, which Salazar had intended as a means of preservation, had led his own family to ruin. They had isolated themselves so completely that they had withered, becoming a grotesque parody of the nobility they claimed to represent. And yet, the line was not extinct. In the early 20th century, a daughter was born to the Gaunt family. Her name was Merope. And through her, the blood of Salazar Slytherin, along with his locket and his legacy of ambition and resentment, would find its way back to Hogwarts. The thread of lineage, stretched thin and frayed by centuries of pride and decay, was about to be woven into a new and terrible tapestry. The heir was coming, not as a proud pure-blood prince, but as a lonely, forgotten orphan, born of a desperate and tragic union. The greatness of Slytherin was about to be reborn, but in a form so dark and twisted that even Salazar himself might have recoiled in horror. Part 3. Bloodlines, Artifacts, and the Gaunts. Chapter: Marvolo Gaunt, Morphin Gaunt, and Merope Gaunt. To understand the rise of Lord Voldemort, we must first descend into the rot and ruin of his maternal family, the House of Gaunt. In a foul, dilapidated cottage on the edge of Little Hangleton lived the last dregs of Salazar Slytherin's direct bloodline, Marvolo Gaunt and his two children, Morphin and Merope. Their story is not one of grandeur, but of pride festering in poverty, a cautionary tale about what happens when legacy becomes a prison. Marvolo Gaunt was the patriarch, a man consumed by the glories of his ancestry. He was violent, arrogant, and possessed a hair-trigger temper, especially when his family's honor was questioned. He saw himself as magical aristocracy, despite living in filth and squalor. His pride was his only possession, and he brandished it like a weapon. He ruled his small, wretched home with an iron fist, terrorizing his children with verbal and physical abuse. He clung to the two family heirlooms, Slytherin's locket and the Peveril ring, as irrefutable proof of his superiority. For Marvolo, these objects were not just historical artifacts. They were his identity. He wore the ring constantly, a symbol of a status the world no longer acknowledged. His ability to speak Parseltongue was, in his eyes, the ultimate mark of his nobility, a living connection to the great Salazar Slytherin. He instilled in his son, Morphin, this same violent pride and a deep-seated hatred for all things non-magical. Morphin Gaunt was a product of this toxic environment, twisted by generations of inbreeding and a lifetime of his father's hateful rhetoric. He was simple-minded and brutish, with a preference for speaking Parseltongue over English. His magic was uncontrolled, fueled by malice and instinct rather than discipline. He shared his father's contempt for Muggles and took a cruel delight in tormenting them. He was a creature of pure, unthinking prejudice, a living embodiment of the Gaunt family's decay. He represented the end result of an ideology that values blood over character, tradition over progress. And then there was Merope. Merope Gaunt is one of the most tragic figures in the history of the wizarding world. Raised under the tyrannical rule of her father and the constant torment of her brother, she was a broken, downtrodden figure. Her father and brother considered her a squib, a person of magical parentage with little to no magical ability, because the constant abuse and fear had suppressed her powers. She was plain, listless, and seemingly devoid of the Gaunt pride. But beneath her submissive exterior, a powerful and desperate ambition was stirring. Merope's ambition was not for power or glory, but for love. She had become infatuated with a handsome and wealthy muggle from the village, Tom Riddle Sr. He represented everything her life was not: beauty, kindness, wealth, and freedom. She would watch him from afar, her obsession growing with each passing day. Her father and brother, of course, were disgusted by her affection for a filthy muggle. Morphin, in a fit of rage after seeing Riddle ride past their cottage, hexed him, an act that brought the Ministry of Magic down upon their heads. This confrontation with the Ministry proved to be the turning point. When Ministry official Bob Ogden arrived, Marvolo and Morphin met him with violent hostility, proudly admitting their crimes and spewing pure blood rhetoric. Their actions led to their arrest and imprisonment in Azkaban. For the first time in her life, Merope was free. With her father and brother gone, Merope's magic, no longer suppressed by fear, bloomed, and she used it to achieve her one great desire. The exact method is not stated in the canonical texts, but it is heavily implied that she used a love potion to ensnare Tom Riddle Sr. She tricked him into falling in love with her, and they eloped. It was a desperate act, a profound violation, but it was also an act of agency from a young woman who had never been allowed any. She chose her own path, using her Slytherin cunning and resourcefulness to get what she wanted. But a love built on deception cannot last. Merope, perhaps believing that Tom Riddle had genuinely come to love her, or perhaps growing tired of the constant magical coercion, eventually stopped giving him the potion. The moment the enchantment was lifted, reality returned. Tom Riddle, horrified by what had been done to him, and repulsed by the dreary, impoverished life he was now living with a pregnant Merope, abandoned her without a second thought. Left alone, pregnant, and heartbroken in London, Merope's will seemed to shatter. She had achieved her dream only to have it turn to ash. She sold the one thing of immense value she had left, Salazar Slytherin's locket, to Caractacus Burke of Borgin and Burke's for a pittance, a mere 10 galleons. It was a final, tragic act of a woman who had lost all hope. She gave birth to her son at a Muggle orphanage, naming him Tom after his father, and Marvolo after hers. With her last breath, she expressed the hope that he would look like his handsome father. And then she died. Merope Gaunt's story is a dark mirror of the Slytherin ethos. She possessed the ambition and cunning of her ancestor, but her goal was tragically small and personal. Her use of magic to subvert another's will is a clear example of the ends justify the means philosophy, taken to a deeply personal and destructive conclusion. She is a victim of horrific abuse, but also a perpetrator of a terrible magical crime. Her tragedy is that she escaped one prison only to build another for herself and the man she claimed to love. And in doing so, she brought into the world a child who would inherit all of the Gaunt resentment, all of the Slytherin ambition, but none of the capacity to understand the love his mother had so desperately craved. Chapter: The Locket, the Ring, and the Weight of Ancestry. The heirlooms of the House of Gaunt were more than just valuable antiques. They were vessels of history, imbued with the magic and the memory of their powerful owners. Their journey through time tells a story of power, loss, and the corrupting influence of dark magic. The two most significant artifacts were Salazar Slytherin's locket and the Peveril ring. The locket was a masterpiece of wizarding craftsmanship, a heavy gold oval engraved with the serpentine S of Slytherin. inlaid with glittering green stones. It was created by Salazar himself, and was one of his most prized possessions. As a Parselmouth, he likely imbued it with spells and protections known only to him. For centuries, it was the ultimate symbol of the Slytherin bloodline, passed down from one generation to the next, a constant reminder of their noble heritage. When it came into the possession of the Gaunts, it represented their last link to a faded glory. It was a source of immense pride for Marvolo, a physical manifestation of his superiority. Merope's sale of the locket for a mere 10 galleons was a moment of profound historical significance. In that single transaction, a priceless artifact, a piece of Hogwarts history, was cast aside. It was purchased by Hepzibah Smith, a wealthy, elderly witch and a collector of magical treasures. The locket, once a symbol of pure blood pride, became a collector's item, stripped of its ancestral meaning and reduced to a mere curiosity. The second artifact, the ring, had an even more complex history. It was a simple gold ring, crudely set with a black stone that bore a strange triangular symbol. The Gaunts treasured it as the Peveril coat of arms, proof of their descent from Cadmus Peveril, one of the 3 brothers from the legend of the Deathly Hallows. They were correct about the lineage, but they were ignorant of the stone's true nature. It was the Resurrection Stone, one of the 3 Hallows, a legendary artifact said to be capable of bringing back echoes of the dead. For generations, the Gaunts wore a relic of unimaginable power, without ever understanding what it was. For them, its value was purely symbolic, another testament to their grand ancestry. Both of these artifacts, the locket and the ring, would eventually find their way back to the last true heir of Slytherin, Tom Marvolo Riddle. After Merope's death, the ring remained in the possession of her brother, Morphine. The locket sat in Hepzibah Smith's collection. Tom Riddle, during his time at Hogwarts and in the years immediately following, became obsessed with his heritage. He sought out the truth of his parentage, a journey that led him to the squalid Gaunt shack in Little Hangleton. There he met his uncle, Morphin. From him, Riddle learned the story of his Muggle father and his witch mother. The revelation filled him with a cold fury. He despised his father for abandoning his mother, and he despised his mother for her weakness, for dying rather than using her magic to save herself. In that moment, he rejected the name of his filthy Muggle father and embraced his Slytherin ancestry. He stunned Morphin, stole the Peveril ring, and went to the Riddle house, where he murdered his father and grandparents, using his uncle's wand to frame him for the crime. Years later, Riddle, now working at Borgin and Burke's, used his charm to beguile Hepzibah Smith. She showed him her 2 greatest treasures, Helga Hufflepuff's cup and Salazar Slytherin's locket. Riddle was captivated. 2 days later, Hepzibah Smith was dead, her house elf blamed for accidentally poisoning her, and the cup and the locket were gone. For Tom Riddle, these heirlooms were not just symbols of his ancestry. They were instruments of his ambition. He was not content to simply possess them. He sought to bend them to his will, to use their historical power to fuel his quest for immortality. He desecrated them, turning both Slytherin's locket and the ring of his Peveril ancestors into Horcruxes, vessels for fragments of his own soul. The weight of ancestry, which had crushed the Gaunts, was transformed by Tom Riddle into a source of immense power. He took the symbols of his heritage and twisted them into something monstrous. The locket, once a mark of nobility, became a container for a piece of a murderer's soul, capable of poisoning the minds of those who wore it. The ring, holding the Resurrection Stone, was cursed in such a way that it would wither the hand of anyone who dared to put it on. The journey of these artifacts is a powerful metaphor for the Slytherin legacy itself. In the hands of Salazar, they were symbols of power and pride. In the hands of the Gaunts, they were relics of a dead past, objects of pathetic worship. And in the hands of Tom Riddle, they became weapons, tools of dark magic, their noble history corrupted to serve a singular, selfish, and terrifying ambition. The weight of ancestry can be a source of strength, but it can also be a path to ruin. For the last heir of Slytherin, it was both. Part 4. Tom Marvolo Riddle and the Transformation into Voldemort. Chapter: The Orphan Who Read the Walls. On the last day of 1926, a boy was born in a cold, sterile Muggle orphanage in London. He was named Tom Marvolo Riddle. His mother died within the hour, leaving him utterly alone, with no knowledge of who he was or what he was destined to become. But from a very young age, it was clear that Tom was different. He was a quiet, self-possessed child, unnervingly handsome and fiercely independent. He did not cry. He did not seek affection. He collected secrets and held himself apart from the other children, who both feared and respected him. Strange things happened around Tom Riddle, things he could not explain, but which he learned to control. He could move objects with his mind. He could make animals do his bidding. He could talk to snakes. He discovered that he could inflict pain on those who displeased him, not with his fists, but with his will. At a young age, on a trip to the seaside, he terrorized 2 other orphans, Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop, in a cave. What he did to them was never fully known, but it left them permanently traumatized. He stole from other children, not out of need, but for the pleasure of possession, collecting a small box of trophies that represented his power over them. His childhood in Wool's orphanage was a lonely and loveless existence. He had no family, no friends, no one to guide him. He had only his strange abilities and a growing sense of his own superiority. He knew he was special, and he despised the commonness of the world around him. His ambition, born in the cold isolation of the orphanage, was for power and control. He wanted to be more than just Tom. He wanted to be unique, to be feared, to be great. His life changed forever on the day Albus Dumbledore came to visit. Dumbledore, then the Transfiguration professor at Hogwarts, came to offer him a place at the school. In their first meeting, the dynamic that would define their relationship for the next 50 years was established. Dumbled in Dumbledore, Tom saw a powerful wizard, someone who was not intimidated by him, and he was wary. In Tom, Dumbledore saw a brilliant, charismatic boy, but also a chilling lack of remorse and a dangerous lust for power. He saw the cruelty in the boy's past and recognized the potential for a dark future. Hogwarts was a revelation for Tom. For the first time, he was in a place where he belonged. He was no longer a freak, but a wizard. And not just any wizard. The Sorting Hat, without hesitation, placed him in Slytherin House. In the dungeons, surrounded by the ambitious and the pure-blooded, Tom Riddle found his true home. He was a model student. He was brilliant, charming, and universally admired by his teachers, with the notable exception of Dumbledore. He became a prefect and then head boy. He excelled in every subject, driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge and power. But his true education was happening in secret. He delved deep into the darkest corners of the library, seeking out spells and information that were far beyond the school curriculum. His most important discovery, however, came from listening. He was a Parselmouth, and he soon learned what that meant. He was the descendant of Salazar Slytherin. This revelation was the key that unlocked his entire identity. He was not just an orphan. He was the heir of the great Slytherin, the inheritor of a noble and powerful legacy. He embraced this identity with a fervent passion. He began to search for his ancestors' hidden chamber. He spent 5 years searching, driven by the belief that he was destined to fulfill Salazar's work. He finally found the entrance in the girls' bathroom, and with a single hissed word, he opened it. Deep beneath the school, he found the Chamber of Secrets, and within it, the basilisk. He was the master of the monster. He had proven himself the true heir. In his 5th year, he unleashed the basilisk on the school. His targets were Muggle-born students, those he deemed unworthy. The attacks caused terror and panic, culminating in the death of a student, Myrtle Warren. When it became clear that the school was on the verge of being closed, an event that would force him to return to the orphanage, Riddle acted decisively. He framed another student, Rubius Hagrid, a Gryffindor, with a love for dangerous creatures, for the attacks. Hagrid was expelled, and Riddle received an award for special services to the school. He had successfully protected his secret, eliminated a Muggle-born, and secured his place at Hogwarts. But he knew he could not keep the chamber open indefinitely. Dumbledore was watching him too closely. So, with a remarkable piece of dark magic, he created a vessel to preserve his 16-year-old self. He used his diary, a simple blank book, and transformed it into his first Horcrux, using the murder of Myrtle Warren to split his soul. He poured his memories, his ambitions, and a fragment of his very being into the diary, ensuring that his work of opening the chamber could one day be completed by another. The orphan from Wolves had found his kingdom. He had read the secret history written on the walls of Hogwarts and claimed it as his own. His ambition was no longer just about personal power. It was about fulfilling a legacy, a dark and terrible destiny that had been waiting 1,000 years for his arrival. He was no longer just Tom Riddle. He was the heir of Slytherin, and he was just beginning. Chapter: Horcrux Philosophy. At the heart of Tom Riddle's transformation into Lord Voldemort lies a single, all-consuming fear: the fear of death. For Riddle, death was a shameful human weakness, an indignity to be conquered. His ambition was not merely for power in the mortal world, but for the ultimate power: immortality. He sought to achieve this not through the elixir of life produced by the Philosopher's Stone, which would create a dependent existence, but through a darker, more permanent method. He sought to master the magic of Horcruxes. A Horcrux is an object in which a dark wizard has hidden a fragment of his soul. The concept is one of the most arcane and depraved branches of magic. To create a Horcrux, a wizard must commit the supreme act of evil: murder. The act of murder rips the soul apart, and through a complex and horrifying spell, the wizard can then encase the torn fragment in an object, anchoring themselves to the mortal plane. As long as the Horcrux remains intact, the wizard cannot truly die. Even if their body is destroyed, their fragmented soul endures, allowing them to regenerate and return to power. The books on this subject, such as Magic Moste Evile, describe the process as unnatural and monstrous. They warn that splitting the soul is a violation of nature that diminishes the creator, leaving them less human. Most dark wizards who dared to tread this path created only one Horcrux, believing that was enough to secure their immortality. But Tom Riddle's ambition and his arrogance knew no bounds. He learned of Horcruxes from the books in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library. He then used his considerable charm to press his head of house, Professor Horace Slughorn, for more specific information. In a conversation that Slughorn would later regret for the rest of his life, Riddle asked about the possibility of creating more than one Horcrux. He was fascinated by the number 7, which he considered to be the most magically powerful number. He wanted to know if splitting his soul into 7 pieces would make him stronger, more immortal. Slughorn, though intrigued by the boy's academic curiosity, was horrified by the question. He told Riddle that it was hypothetical, wicked magic, and refused to discuss it further. But the seed had been planted. Riddle saw the creation of multiple Horcruxes not as a path to degradation, but as the ultimate expression of his power. He would not just cheat death, he would conquer it on an unprecedented scale. His first Horcrux, as we have seen, was his diary. Created with the murder of Myrtle Warren, the diary was a particularly ingenious choice. It was not just a container for his soul, but a weapon. It retained the consciousness and memories of his 16-year-old self, able to communicate with and manipulate anyone who wrote in its pages. It was a Horcrux that could think, persuade, and act on its own. His second was the Peveril ring, which he took from his uncle Morphin. He used the murder of his father, Tom Riddle Sr., to create this Horcrux. This act was deeply symbolic. He used the patricide to anchor his own soul, transforming an emblem of his hated Muggle ancestry into a tool for his own eternal life. He then set out to collect other objects of historical significance, artifacts that he felt were worthy of holding pieces of his magnificent soul. He stole Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket from Hepzibah Smith, murdering her to create 2 more Horcruxes. The choice of Founder's artifacts was deliberate. It was an act of supreme arrogance, a way of claiming that he was the true heir of Hogwarts, greater than the Founders themselves. He traveled to Albania, a place known for its connection to dark magic, and found the lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. He learned its location by charming the ghost of Ravenclaw's daughter, the Grey Lady. He used the murder of an Albanian peasant to turn the diadem into his 5th Horcrux, and then returned to Hogwarts years later, under the guise of applying for the Defense Against the Dark Arts position to hide it in the Room of Requirement. His 6th Horcrux was his snake, Nagini. The use of a living creature was a further perversion of this dark magic. He likely created this Horcrux with the murder of Ministry of Magic official Bertha Jorkins. Nagini became his constant companion, a living symbol of his Slytherin heritage and a deadly protector of a part of his soul. The Horcrux philosophy reveals the true nature of Riddle's evil. It was not born of a political ideology or a desire for social change. It was born of a deeply personal and narcissistic fear of his own mortality. He did not see other people as human beings, but as tools or obstacles in his quest for eternal life. Murder was not a tragic necessity, but a creative act, a means to an end. In splitting his soul, he mutilated his own humanity. With each Horcrux he created, he became less stable, less capable of feeling anything resembling love or empathy. His physical appearance itself began to change, his handsome features contorting into a serpentine skeletal visage. He was literally losing his soul, piece by piece, in his desperate attempt to save his life. The ultimate irony of Lord Voldemort is that in his quest to become immortal, he destroyed everything that made life worth living, becoming a monster trapped in a self-made prison of fear and hatred. His philosophy was the ultimate expression of Slytherin self-preservation, twisted into a grotesque and terrifying extreme. Chapter: The First Followers. As Tom Riddle grew in power and knowledge at Hogwarts, he began to attract a following. He was not a solitary practitioner of the dark arts. He was a charismatic leader, a magnetic personality who drew others to him like moths to a flame. He did not seek friends or equals. He sought followers, servants who would be bound to his will. This first group of followers, who would later become the first generation of Death Eaters, were almost exclusively from his own house, Slytherin. Slytherin House provided the perfect recruiting ground. Its culture of ambition, its emphasis on pure blood lineage, and its ingrained suspicion of the outside world made many of its students receptive to Riddle's message. He presented himself as the heir of Slytherin, a figure of destiny who had come to restore the wizarding world to its proper order. He spoke of a future where pure bloods would no longer have to hide their power, where Muggleborns would be put in their place, and where wizards would rule supreme. His first followers were not a mindless mob. They were the scions of old, wealthy, pure-blood families. Names like Malfoy, Lestrange, Nott, Avery, and Rozier. These were students who had been raised on the same ideology of blood purity that Riddle was now championing. They saw in him a leader who could make their prejudiced beliefs a reality. He was not just a schoolboy. He was a revolutionary. Riddle was a master of manipulation. He knew how to appeal to their desires and their grievances. To those who craved power, he promised a share of his own. To those who felt their ancient families had been disrespected by the Ministry of Magic, he promised a restoration of their status. To those who feared the increasing influence of Muggles and Muggleborns, he promised a purification of the wizarding world. He did not rule them through fear alone, at least not at first. He used his charm, his intelligence, and his undeniable magical talent to win their loyalty. They saw him as a visionary. They were his inner circle, his friends, as he called them, though he felt no true friendship for any of them. They were his first tools, his first devoted servants. They performed tasks for him, helped him uncover ancient secrets, and served as a loyal chorus, amplifying his influence within the school. However, not all Slytherins were swayed. The house was not a monolith. There were many students who were ambitious and cunning but had no interest in Riddle's dark agenda. Some were simply focused on their own careers, wanting to use their Slytherin connections to secure a good job at the ministry or in the world of magical business. Others were intelligent enough to see the danger in Riddle's radical ideology and the instability in his personality. They kept their distance, observing from the sidelines, careful not to get drawn into his orbit. This created a schism within Slytherin House that would persist for decades. There were those who embraced the dark path offered by the heir of Slytherin, and those who chose a different application for their ambition. This division is crucial to understanding the complexity of the house. Slytherin's traits of cunning and self-preservation could lead one to become a Death Eater, but they could also lead one to recognize that aligning with a genocidal maniac was a poor, long-term survival strategy. After leaving Hogwarts, Riddle's inner circle grew into the organization known as the Death Eaters. They were bound to him by the Dark Mark, a magical tattoo that burned when he summoned them. Their loyalty was no longer a matter of schoolboy admiration. It was a magical and terrifying bond. They became his army, his agents of terror during the First Wizarding War. The recruitment patterns established at Hogwarts continued. The Death Eaters were drawn primarily from pure-blood Slytherin families who believed they had the most to gain from Voldemort's New World Order. They were attracted to the power, the prestige, and the promise of a society where they would be at the top. But Riddle's appeal was not limited to the elite. He also recruited those who were marginalized and desperate, such as werewolves like Fenrir Greyback, promising them a status and acceptance they had never known. He was a master at exploiting grievances and turning them to his advantage. Slytherin House was the fertile ground from which the Death Eaters sprang, but it was not the sole source. The darkness that Voldemort unleashed was a perversion of Slytherin values, but it was not their only possible outcome. The House of the Ambitious and the Cunning produced both the architects of a reign of terror and those who would, in their own quiet and resourceful ways, resist it. The story of the first followers is a reminder that the path of ambition can lead to greatness, but it can also lead to servitude, and the choice is not always as clear as it seems from the outside. Part 5. Slytherin in the Classroom Culture Across Eras. Chapter: Head of House and Mentorship. The character and culture of any Hogwarts house are profoundly shaped by its head. This individual serves as a guide, a disciplinarian, and a mentor, their personality coloring the experience of every student under their care. For Slytherin House, two of the most significant heads of house in the modern era were Horace Slughorn and Severus Snape. Their contrasting styles of leadership reveal the two faces of Slytherin ambition, one focused on influence and connection, the other on discipline and survival. Horace Slughorn was head of Slytherin for many decades, including during Tom Riddle's time at the school. Slughorn embodied a particular brand of ambition. He was not a dark wizard, nor was he overtly prejudiced. His primary motivation was comfort, influence, and the pleasure of being connected to successful people. He was a talent scout, a collector of promising students. He created the Slug Club, an exclusive group of students he believed were destined for greatness. Membership was based on talent, family connections, or sheer charisma. Slughorn's mentorship was all about networking. He would introduce his favorite students to influential alumni, help them secure prestigious jobs after graduation, and bask in their reflected glory. He saw potential everywhere and sought to cultivate it for both the students' benefit and his own. For a bright, ambitious Slytherin, an invitation to the Slug Club was a golden ticket. It was the ultimate expression of the house's tradition of patronage. However, Slughorn's method had a dark side. It was inherently elitist. He favored the well-connected and the obviously talented, often overlooking students who were less polished or from less impressive backgrounds. His ambition was passive and self-serving. He enjoyed the proximity to power, but shied away from any real responsibility or moral courage. His greatest failure was his interaction with Tom Riddle. He was so charmed by the boy's brilliance and so flattered by his attention that he failed to see the profound darkness within. He gave Riddle the crucial information about Horcruxes, a mistake driven by a desire to impress his star pupil. The guilt from this act would haunt him for the rest of his life. Slughorn represents a Slytherin who values success and influence above all else, but who lacks the moral fortitude to confront true evil when it sits in his own drawing room. Severus Snape's tenure as head of Slytherin was vastly different. Snape was a man forged in conflict and secrecy. He ruled the dungeons with an iron will and a biting sarcasm. Where Slughorn was indulgent, Snape was severe. Where Slughorn sought to collect favorites, Snape showed a biased but fiercely protective loyalty to his entire house. Snape's mentorship was not about parties and networking. It was about survival. He understood the dangers that his students faced, both from the outside world that was increasingly suspicious of them, and from the internal pressures of their own families, many of whom were Death Eaters. He was preparing them for a world at war. His strictness and his demanding standards were designed to make them strong, resilient, and resourceful. He was undeniably partial to his own students. He would often turn a blind eye to their misdeeds while punishing Gryffindors for the slightest infraction. From the outside, this looked like simple favoritism and cruelty. But from within the house, it was seen as protection. Snape was their champion, the one person who would always take their side, no matter what. In a school where they were often vilified and misunderstood, this created a powerful bond of loyalty. Snape's Slytherin was a house under siege. He taught them to be cunning, to keep their heads down, and to look out for each other. He was not grooming them for success in the traditional sense. He was teaching them how to navigate a treacherous political landscape. His own life as a double agent was the ultimate lesson in Slytherin cunning and self-preservation. He lived a life of constant deception, playing a role to achieve a greater goal. The contrast between Slughorn and Snape is the contrast between Slytherin in times of peace and Slytherin in times of war. Slughorn's approach was suited to a world where ambition could be pursued through social connections and mutual benefit. Snape's approach was a product of a darker time, where ambition was a matter of life and death, and loyalty to one's own was the only shield against a hostile world. Both men, in their own ways, embodied the core tenets of their house, and the students they mentored were shaped in their image, prepared for the very different futures that awaited them. Chapter: House Rivalries and Misconceptions. No rivalry in the history of Hogwarts is as famous or as deeply entrenched as the one between Slytherin and Gryffindor. It is a rivalry that began with their founders and has been carried on by every subsequent generation of students. It is more than just a competition for the House Cup. It is a clash of ideologies, a fundamental disagreement about the nature of magic, power, and morality. To the Gryffindors, Slytherins are dark, cheating, and cowardly. They are seen as bullies who use their cunning for selfish and malicious ends. Every Slytherin student enters the school under this cloud of suspicion. Their ambition is interpreted as greed, their resourcefulness as deceit, and their sense of self-preservation as a lack of courage. This stereotype is reinforced by the undeniable fact that Slytherin has produced a disproportionate number of dark wizards. The actions of Voldemort and his Death Eaters cast a long, dark shadow over the entire house, staining the reputation of every student who wears the silver and green. To the Slytherins, Gryffindors are arrogant, reckless, and self-righteous. They see Gryffindor bravery as a foolish disregard for consequences, a desire to play the hero without any thought for strategy or subtlety. They resent the way Gryffindors are almost always cast as the heroes of the story, their own house relegated to the role of the villain. They see the other house's immediate suspicion of them as unfair prejudice, a judgment passed before they have even had a chance to prove themselves. This cycle of mistrust creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Slytherin students, ostracized and viewed with suspicion by the rest of the school, retreat into their own house, forming a tight-knit, defensive community. This isolation only reinforces the perception that they are secretive and untrustworthy. They are expected to be the villains, and so, for some, it becomes easier to embrace that role than to fight against it. But the stereotype, like all stereotypes, is an oversimplification. It ignores the moments of courage and redemption that have come from within Slytherin House. It ignores the complexity of its members and the different ways in which their traits can manifest. Consider the case of Regulus Black, a pure blood from a fanatical Death Eater family. He joined Voldemort's cause as a young man. But when he discovered the truth about Horcruxes and the Dark Lord's utter disregard for all life, even that of his loyal house elf creature, he had a profound change of heart. In an act of incredible bravery that directly rivaled anything a Gryffindor could have done, he defied Voldemort. He figured out the secret of the locket Horcrux and set out to destroy it, sacrificing his own life in the process. His courage was quiet, secret, and strategic. It was a uniquely Slytherin form of heroism. Or consider Horace Slughorn. For years, he lived in fear, hiding from his past mistake. But in the final moments of the Battle of Hogwarts, he made a choice. He returned to the school, not alone, but with reinforcements from Hogsmeade. He rallied the parents and the shopkeepers, leading them into the fray. He then personally dueled Lord Voldemort himself, alongside Minerva McGonagall and Kingsley Shacklebolt. It was an act of profound courage, a final rejection of his own self-serving cowardice. Even Narcissa Malfoy, a woman who believed in pure blood supremacy and supported her husband's role as a Death Eater, showed a different kind of courage. Her ultimate loyalty was not to Voldemort or his ideology, but to her son Draco. In the Forbidden Forest, she lied to the most powerful dark wizard of all time, telling him that Harry Potter was dead, an act of deception that was crucial to Voldemort's downfall. Her motivation was love for her family, a core Slytherin value, and she used her cunning to protect it. The cost of the constant suspicion placed upon Slytherin is immense. It pushes students who might otherwise have been neutral or even good towards the path of darkness, simply because it is the only path where they feel accepted. It forces those who do choose to do the right thing to do so in secret, their heroism often going unrecognized. The greatest misconception about Slytherin is that its values are inherently evil. Ambition, cunning, and self-preservation are not evil. They are tools. They can be used to build an empire of darkness, as Voldemort did. But they can also be used to orchestrate a secret rebellion, as Regulus Black did, or to save a child, as Narcissa Malfoy did, or to play the long game of espionage that ultimately saves the world, as Severus Snape did. The story of Slytherin is the story of this choice, a choice that is made infinitely more difficult by the weight of a reputation 1,000 years in the making. Part 6. Major Slytherin's in-depth character chapters. Chapter: Salazar Slytherin. Salazar Slytherin remains the most enigmatic and influential figure in the history of his house. A wizard of immense power and unyielding conviction, his legacy is a tapestry woven from threads of genius, paranoia, and profound prejudice. To truly understand him, we must look beyond the caricature of the Dark Founder and see the man shaped by his times. Born in the 10th century, Salazar's early life in the fenlands of England would have been one defined by the ever-present threat of Muggle persecution. This was an era before the International Statute of Secrecy, a time when the magical and non-magical worlds coexisted in a state of fragile, often violent, tension. It was this environment of fear and mistrust that forged his core philosophy. His primary ambition was the preservation of magic and the protection of those who could wield it. In his mind, the greatest threat to this preservation came from the outside, from the Muggles who feared what they did not understand. His signature magical competencies were legendary. He was a master of legilimency, able to penetrate the minds of others with ease. This skill would have reinforced his natural suspicion, allowing him to see the hidden fears and prejudices in the hearts of those around him. His most famous ability, however, was Parseltongue. The ability to speak with serpents was exceptionally rare and marked him as a wizard of a special and ancient lineage. He did not see it as a dark art, but as a gift, a direct connection to the primal forces of magic. The serpent became his symbol, representing not evil, but a potent and misunderstood form of wisdom and power. His pivotal moral crossroads came during the founding of Hogwarts. His friendship with Godric Gryffindor, likely his closest peer, was shattered by their fundamental disagreement on student admissions. Gryffindor's belief in inclusivity and courage, regardless of bloodline, clashed directly with Slytherin's cautious, elitist pragmatism. Slytherin argued that accepting Muggleborns was a security risk, an open invitation for betrayal. He believed that true magical talent was inherited, and that diluting the student body with those of lesser blood would weaken the wizarding world in the long run. This was not just an academic debate. It was a clash of worldviews. Gryffindor saw a world of potential allies and heroes. Slytherin saw a world of hidden enemies and inevitable betrayal. His relationships with the other founders were also strained by this conflict. He likely respected Rowena Ravenclaw's intellect and Helga Hufflepuff's loyalty, but he could not persuade them of the righteousness of his cause. This growing isolation fueled his paranoia and pushed him to create his ultimate failsafe, the Chamber of Secrets. The creation of the chamber and the placement of the basilisk within it was the culmination of his philosophy. It was an act of profound arrogance and fear. He could not trust his fellow founders to protect the school according to his standards, so he created a weapon that only his own heir could control. It was his final defiant statement, a promise that his vision for Hogwarts would endure, even if he had to leave. What does Salazar's journey teach us about Slytherin values? It teaches us that ambition, when born of fear, can become a corrupting force. His desire to protect the wizarding world was a noble goal, but his methods were divisive and hateful. His cunning, which allowed him to create the perfectly concealed chamber, was a work of genius, but it served a dark purpose. His leadership attracted followers, but it was a leadership based on exclusion and prejudice. Salazar Slytherin is the ultimate cautionary tale of the house he founded. He demonstrates that the line between self-preservation and paranoia is dangerously thin, and that the pursuit of purity, whether of blood or ideology, can lead to the creation of monsters, both literal and figurative. His legacy is not one of simple evil, but of a great and powerful wizard whose ambition was ultimately poisoned by his inability to trust, to forgive, or to see the value in those different from himself. Chapter: The Bloody Baron. Every Hogwarts house has its ghost, a spectral resident who serves as a living, or rather unliving, piece of house history. For Slytherin, that ghost is the Bloody Baron, a silent, terrifying figure. He drifts through the castle's corridors, his vacant eyes staring, his spectral form covered in silver bloodstains. His presence is a constant, grim reminder of a tragedy born from obsessive love and violent rage, a story that encapsulates the darker potential of the Slytherin character. In life, the Baron was a nobleman who attended Hogwarts in the time of the founders, and he was sorted into Slytherin House. He was a contemporary of the other house ghosts, and most importantly, of Helena Ravenclaw, the daughter of the founder Rowena Ravenclaw. The Baron fell deeply and obsessively in love with Helena. She, however, did not return his affections. She was proud and ambitious in her own right, and she sought a different kind of legacy. Helena's formative choice was one driven by a desire to surpass her brilliant mother. Jealous of Rowena's wisdom and fame, she stole her mother's diadem, an artifact said to enhance the wisdom of the wearer. She fled with it, hoping to use its power to make herself cleverer and more important than her mother. Rowena Ravenclaw, heartbroken and falling gravely ill, kept her daughter's betrayal a secret. However, desperate to see Helena one last time, she sent a man she knew would not rest until he had found her, the Baron. The Baron's pivotal moral crossroads came when he finally tracked Helena to a forest in Albania. He begged her to return with him, to come back to her dying mother. Helena, proud and defiant, refused. The Baron, who had always possessed a fiery temper, a trait not uncommon among ambitious Slytherins, was consumed by rage at her rejection. In a moment of uncontrolled fury, he drew his dagger and stabbed her. The instant the act was done, he was overcome with remorse. The love he had professed, twisted by his possessive nature, had led him to murder the very person he desired. In a final desperate act of atonement, he took the same dagger and ended his own life. This is the origin of his spectral form. He returned to Hogwarts as a ghost, forever bound to the place of his happiest and most tragic memories. He wears his ghostly chains as a sign of his penance, and the blood that stains his form is Helena's, a permanent silver reminder of his terrible crime. Helena, too, returned as a ghost, becoming the Grey Lady of Ravenclaw House, forever haunting the place of her betrayal. What does the Bloody Baron's journey teach us about Slytherin values? His story is a dark exploration of ambition, applied to personal desire. His ambition was to possess Helena, to win her love at any cost. His cunning allowed him to track her across the continent, but his lack of emotional control and his possessiveness turned his quest into a tragedy. He exemplifies the danger of a singular, obsessive focus, a trait that can be a strength in the pursuit of power or knowledge, but can be catastrophic when applied to human relationships. His legacy as the Slytherin ghost is one of fear and respect. He is the only entity at Hogwarts, besides Dumbledore, that the poltergeist Peeves truly fears. His silent, tormented presence serves as a constant, unspoken warning to the students of his house. It is a warning about the destructive power of unchecked passion, about the fine line between determination and obsession, and about the fact that some mistakes, once made, can never be undone. The blood he wears is a testament to the price of greatness when it is sought without wisdom or compassion. Chapter: Phineas Nigellus Black. We are blacks, and we are royal. This sentiment, echoed through generations, finds its most articulate and sardonic voice in Phineas Nigellus Black, one of the most unpopular headmasters Hogwarts has ever known, and a quintessential Slytherin. His portrait, which hangs in the headmaster's office and in number 12, Grimmauld Place, serves as a reluctant, often cantankerous source of information, providing a unique window into the mind of a pure-blood elitist who valued tradition, power, and the preservation of his family's name above all else. Phineas Nigellus lived in the 19th century, a product of the wealthy and fiercely pure-blood House of Black. From a young age, he was steeped in the ideology of blood supremacy. He was intelligent, shrewd, and possessed a sharp, cynical wit that he used to dismiss anyone he considered his inferior, a category that included most of the wizarding world. His early life was one of privilege, and he moved through the world with the easy arrogance of a man who has never had his own superiority questioned. His signature magical competency was not in dueling or flashy spell work, but in the subtle art of political maneuvering and social influence. He understood how power worked, how to curry favor, and how to maintain the status quo that so greatly benefited families like his own. His ambition led him to the position of headmaster of Hogwarts, the pinnacle of academic prestige in the wizarding world. However, by his own admission, he disliked the profession, finding students tedious and tiresome. His motivation was likely not a love of education, but the status and influence that came with the position. His pivotal moral crossroads were not dramatic, single moments, but a lifetime of small choices that reinforced his prejudiced worldview. He consistently upheld the values of pure-blood supremacy, dismissing the concerns of Muggle-borns and showing a clear favoritism towards students from good families, particularly those in his own Slytherin house. His famous quote, "You know, Minister, I disagree with Dumbledore on many counts, but you cannot deny he's got style," reveals his character perfectly. He could respect power and panache, even in an ideological opponent like Dumbledore, but he had little time for the moral principles that drove him. His relationship with his family was central to his identity. He was immensely proud of the House of Black, and his primary loyalty was to them. This loyalty, however, did not extend to family members who deviated from the pure-blood path. He disowned his own son, also named Phineas, for supporting Muggle rights, seeing it as a betrayal of everything their family stood for. This act demonstrates the rigidity of his beliefs. Family was paramount, but only so long as it adhered to his strict code of conduct. What does Phineas Nigelus's journey teach us about Slytherin values? He represents the establishment Slytherin. His ambition was not revolutionary, like Voldemort's, but conservative. He sought to preserve a system of power that was already in place. His cunning was political, his leadership a matter of maintaining order and tradition. He embodies the Slytherin trait of pride in lineage taken to its extreme. He is not a villain in the mold of a Death Eater. He is a bureaucrat of bigotry, a man whose prejudice is so ingrained that he sees it simply as the natural order of things. His posthumous role as a portrait messenger for the Order of the Phoenix is deeply ironic. He is forced to serve the very people he would have despised in life: blood traders, werewolves, and the Muggle-born. He does so with constant complaint and disdain, but he does it nonetheless, bound by the magic of his office. His story is a lesson in the limitations of a rigid worldview. Phineas Nigelus Black was a man of great intelligence and influence, but his legacy is one of narrow-mindedness, a cautionary tale of how the Slytherin pursuit of status can lead to a life of hollow, self-satisfied prejudice, ultimately leaving one on the wrong side of history. Chapter: Regulus Arcturus Black. In the shadowed gallery of Slytherin heroes, few figures are as compelling or as tragic as Regulus Arcturus Black. For most of his short life, he was the perfect pure-blood son, the heir who walked the path his family had laid for him. But in his final days, he made a choice that was so brave, so defiant, and so utterly unexpected that it stands as one of the most powerful acts of redemption in the history of the Wizarding Wars. His story is a testament to the fact that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. Regulus grew up in the oppressive gloom of Number 12, Grimmauld Place, the younger son of Orion and Walburga Black. He was raised in the shadow of his rebellious older brother Sirius. While Sirius defied their family's pure-blood ideology, was sorted into Gryffindor, and ultimately ran away from home, Regulus did everything that was expected of him. He was sorted into Slytherin, he excelled as a seeker on the House Quidditch team, and he embraced his family's prejudiced views. He was the dutiful son, the heir who seemed destined to carry on the dark legacy of the House of Black. His early life was shaped by his parents' approval and his brother's absence. He admired his brother's talent, but he was also hurt and confused by his rejection of their family. Seeking to prove his own worth and loyalty, Regulus went down the path Sirius had scorned. As a teenager, he became fascinated with Lord Voldemort, who was then rising to power. Voldemort's message of pure blood supremacy resonated with everything Regulus had been taught. He saw the Dark Lord as a champion for his cause, a leader who would restore the ancient families to their rightful place of power. At the tender age of 16, Regulus Black became a Death Eater. His signature artifact was a locket, a replica of Salazar Slytherin's, which he left in the place of the real one. This act of cunning substitution was a purely Slytherin move, designed to trick the Dark Lord and buy time for the Horcrux's destruction. The pivotal moral crossroads of his life came when he discovered the true nature of the master he had sworn to serve. Voldemort, in his arrogance, asked to borrow a house elf from one of his followers to test the defenses surrounding one of his Horcruxes. Regulus, proud of his family's loyalty and eager to please, volunteered his beloved house elf Kreacher. Voldemort took Kreacher to the secret sea cave, forced him to drink the emerald potion in the basin, and left him to die at the hands of the Inferi in the Dark Lake. But Voldemort underestimated the power of house elf magic. Kreacher, having been ordered by Regulus to return, was able to apparate back to Grimmauld Place. When the terrified, half-dead Kreacher told Regulus what had happened, something inside the young Death Eater broke. He had been raised to believe in a hierarchy, to see house elves as servants. But he had always been kind to Kreacher. The Dark Lord's casual, sadistic cruelty towards a loyal and defenseless Kreacher revealed the utter depravity of his soul. Voldemort was not a noble leader. He was a monster who cared for no one but himself. In that moment, Regulus's loyalty shifted. His ambition was no longer to serve Voldemort, but to destroy him. He used his Slytherin cunning to deduce what Voldemort had been protecting. He understood that the locket was a Horcrux, a piece of the Dark Lord's soul, and he resolved to undo the evil he had helped to support. He ordered Kreacher to take him to the cave. He knew he could not survive, but he was determined to see his mission through. He created the fake locket and wrote the note that would one day be found by Harry Potter, signing it with his initials R.A.B. At the cave, he forced Kreacher to stand back and ordered him to take the real locket and destroy it, and to never tell his family what had happened. Then, Regulus Black, the boy who had always followed the rules, drank the potion himself. Weakened and tormented by the potion's effects, he was dragged into the lake by the Inferi and drowned. He died at the age of 18, a secret hero. What does Regulus's journey teach us about Slytherin values? It teaches that cunning and resourcefulness can be instruments of profound moral courage. Regulus used his insider knowledge as a Death Eater to plan Voldemort's downfall. His self-preservation instinct was overridden by a greater cause, a desire to right a terrible wrong. His story is the ultimate refutation of the Slytherin stereotype. He shows that loyalty can be re-evaluated, that ambition can be redirected, and that a quiet, strategic act of self-sacrifice can be just as brave, if not braver, than a loud, heroic charge. Regulus Arcturus Black lived as a follower, but he died as a rebel, a Slytherin who found his true greatness not in serving a Dark Lord, but in choosing to defy him. Fanfiction sidebar. It is not recorded in the books what Regulus experienced after drinking the potion. Many interpretations imagine that the potion forced him to relive his worst memories, his brother leaving him behind, his parents' cold disappointment, and the terrible realization of the evil he had served. In this interpretation, his final act of walking to the lake was not just a suicide, but a conscious choice to face the consequences of his past and to cleanse his family's name, in his own small way, from the stain of the Dark Lord. His final thoughts were not of fear, but of a quiet, resolute peace. Chapter: Bellatrix Lestrange. There is ambition that seeks to build, and there is ambition that seeks only to burn. Bellatrix Lestrange, born Bellatrix Black, was the living embodiment of the latter. The most fanatically loyal of all Lord Voldemort's followers, she was a witch of formidable power, unhinged cruelty, and a terrifying, all-consuming devotion. Her story is not one of complex moral ambiguity, but a chilling portrait of how the pride and passion of a noble house can curdle into a violent, sadistic madness. Bellatrix was the eldest daughter of Cygnus and Druella Black, and from a young age she was a fervent believer in the pure blood ideology that defined her family. She was sister to Andromeda, who was disowned for marrying a Muggle-born, and Narcissa, who married into the wealthy Malfoy family. Bellatrix, for her part, married Rodolphus Lestrange, a fellow pureblood from a respected Slytherin family. But her true loyalty, her life's entire devotion, was reserved for Lord Voldemort. She was sorted into Slytherin at Hogwarts and quickly fell in with the group of students who would become the first Death Eaters. She was drawn to Tom Riddle's power, his charisma, and his revolutionary vision. But for Bellatrix, it was more than just political alignment. It was a form of worship. She saw in Voldemort the ultimate expression of Slytherin greatness, and she dedicated her entire being to his service. Her love for him was obsessive and absolute. Her signature magical competencies were in the dark arts. She was a phenomenally skilled duelist, possessing lightning-fast reflexes and a vast arsenal of deadly curses. Her preferred weapon was the Cruciatus Curse, a spell she wielded with an artistic and sadistic flair. She did not just use it to incapacitate, she used it to inflict the maximum amount of pain possible, reveling in the screams of her victims. She found a deep, ecstatic pleasure in cruelty. Her pivotal moral crossroads, if she ever truly faced one, was in the aftermath of Voldemort's first fall. While many other Death Eaters, like Lucius Malfoy, claimed they had been bewitched or coerced, Bellatrix remained defiant. She, along with her husband, his brother Rabastan, and Barty Crouch Jr., refused to believe their master was gone. Their ambition was to find him and restore him to power. This led them to their most infamous crime, the torture of the Aurors, Frank and Alice Longbottom. They used the Cruciatus Curse on the Longbottoms for so long that they drove them into permanent insanity. It was an act of such profound and pointless cruelty that it horrified the wizarding world. For this crime, Bellatrix was sentenced to a lifetime in Azkaban. But the wizarding prison did not break her. It only distilled her fanaticism. When Voldemort engineered a mass breakout years later, she emerged not repentant, but more devoted and more unhinged than ever. She became his most trusted lieutenant, the one follower whose loyalty he never questioned. Her relationships were defined by her devotion to Voldemort. Her marriage to Rodolphus seems to have been one of convenience, a pure blood union. Her relationship with her sister Narcissa was a mix of affection and contempt. She loved her sister, but saw her maternal instincts as a weakness. Her deepest hatred was reserved for anyone who opposed her master, particularly her blood traitor cousin Sirius Black and the mudblood Hermione Granger. She was responsible for the death of Sirius, gloating as he fell through the veil, and she took a perverse personal pleasure in torturing Hermione at Malfoy Manor. What does Bellatrix's journey teach us about Slytherin values? She is a terrifying example of ambition untethered from any moral or strategic compass. Her ambition was simply to serve, to please her master through acts of violence and cruelty. Her leadership qualities were undeniable. She was a fearsome commander in battle, but her leadership was chaotic and destructive. She represents the passion and intensity of the Black family, twisted into a grotesque form. She is not cunning in a strategic sense. She is impulsive and driven by emotion. Her loyalty, a trait often prized in Slytherin, became a form of enslavement, stripping her of any independent thought or personal morality. Bellatrix Lestrange is what happens when the Slytherin desire for greatness becomes an obsession with a single dark figure. She is a black hole of devotion, a witch whose immense talent was entirely consumed by her worship of power, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of pain and madness. Chapter: Narcissa Malfoy. In the rigid black and white world of the Wizarding Wars, Narcissa Malfoy, born Narcissa Black, occupied a space of perpetual gray. She was not a Death Eater. She never bore the dark mark, but she was a fervent believer in pure blood supremacy and the wife of one of Voldemort's most influential followers. She moved in the highest circles of power and darkness, yet her actions were ultimately guided not by ideology or ambition for its own sake, but by a fierce, all-consuming love for her family. Her story is a powerful examination of the Slytherin value of kinship and the extraordinary lengths one will go to in order to protect one's own. Narcissa was the youngest of the three Black sisters. Unlike the fanatical Bellatrix or the rebellious Andromeda, Narcissa was pragmatic and composed. She was described as icily beautiful, her aristocratic bearing a clear reflection of her upbringing. She was raised in the House of Black to believe in the inherent superiority of her bloodline, and she never questioned this core tenet of her identity. She made a suitable and advantageous match, marrying Lucius Malfoy, the wealthy and politically connected heir of another ancient pure-blood family. Together, they were a formidable power couple in the wizarding world, their home at Malfoy Manor becoming a center of pure-blood society. Her primary relationship was with her son Draco. She doted on him, coddling him and ensuring that he wanted for nothing. Her love for him was the central, defining force of her life. While she supported her husband's allegiance to Lord Voldemort, her commitment seems to have been more social and ideological than personal. She enjoyed the status and protection that came with being in the Dark Lord's inner circle, but she lacked her sister Bellatrix's sadistic fanaticism. Narcissa's pivotal moral crossroads began when Voldemort returned to power and took up residence in her home. Malfoy Manor was transformed from a stately home into the headquarters for a terrorist organization. She was forced to host the Dark Lord and his followers, to witness their cruelty, and to live in a constant state of fear. Her world of privilege and comfort was shattered. The true crisis came when her husband, Lucius, failed to retrieve the prophecy from the Department of Mysteries. As punishment for his failure, Voldemort gave their 16-year-old son Draco a seemingly impossible and suicidal mission: to kill Albus Dumbledore. This was the moment when Narcissa's ideological beliefs crashed against the reality of her maternal love. She understood that Draco was being set up to fail, that his life was being used as a pawn in Voldemort's cruel game. Her first act of defiance was to go against Voldemort's explicit orders. She, along with Bellatrix, went to Spinner's End to seek help from Severus Snape. In a desperate, tearful plea, she begged Snape to protect her son. She forced him to make the unbreakable vow, a magical oath that carries a penalty of death if broken, to watch over Draco, and to carry out the task himself if Draco failed. This was an act of incredible cunning and courage. She manipulated her own sister and one of Voldemort's most trusted lieutenants, using their own rules of magical binding against them to save her son. Her second, and most significant, act of defiance came during the Battle of Hogwarts. After Voldemort struck Harry Potter down with the killing curse in the Forbidden Forest, he needed someone to verify that Harry was truly dead. He chose Narcissa. As she approached Harry's still form, she did not check for a pulse. Instead, in a whisper no one else could hear, she asked him a single question: "Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle?" When Harry nodded, she made her choice. Her loyalty was not to the Dark Lord who had just seemingly won the entire war. Her loyalty was to her son. She turned to the assembled Death Eaters and lied, declaring that the boy who lived was dead. This lie was the turning point of the battle. It allowed Harry to be carried back to the castle as a trophy, giving him the element of surprise needed for the final confrontation. Narcissa's act was not one of heroic altruism. It was an act of supreme self-interest, but a self-interest rooted in love. She did not care about the fate of the wizarding world. She cared about getting into the castle to find her son. What does Narcissa's journey teach us about Slytherin values? She is the ultimate embodiment of loyalty to one's own. Her primary allegiance was not to a cause or a leader, but to her family. She used her Slytherin cunning and her remarkable composure under pressure, not for personal gain, but for protection. She shows that the instinct for self-preservation can be extended to encompass one's loved ones, and that this instinct can be a force powerful enough to defy the greatest dark wizard of all time. Narcissa Malfoy was not a good woman, but in the defining moment of her life, she performed a good act, driven by a love that was ultimately more powerful than any dark magic. Chapter: Lucius Malfoy. Lucius Malfoy was the personification of aristocratic Slytherin ambition. He was wealthy, politically influential, and possessed an unshakable belief in his own superiority. For years, he was a master of the political game, a puppet master who pulled strings at the Ministry of Magic and moved through the world with an air of untouchable privilege. But his story is ultimately one of failure, a cautionary tale of a man whose arrogance and thirst for status led to the ruin of everything he held dear. The heir to the Malfoy fortune, Lucius was raised to believe that his name and his blood made him inherently better than everyone else. At Hogwarts, he was a prefect in Slytherin House and quickly fell into Tom Riddle's orbit, becoming one of his early followers. The Malfoy family had always been associated with the darker side of magic and a pure-blood ethos, so Lucius's allegiance to Voldemort was a natural extension of his upbringing. After Voldemort's first fall, Lucius demonstrated his particular brand of Slytherin cunning. He avoided Azkaban by claiming he had been under the imperious curse, that he had been forced to serve the Dark Lord against his will. It was a lie, but it was a convincing one, backed up by his wealth and his extensive political connections. He successfully rehabilitated his public image, becoming a respected, if feared, member of the community. He served as a governor of Hogwarts and maintained a close relationship with the Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, using generous donations to bend the ministry to his will. His signature artifact was his snake-headed walking cane, which concealed his wand. This was a perfect symbol of his character, elegant, aristocratic, and hiding a dangerous secret beneath a polished exterior. His ambition was for influence and power, not through overt violence, but through backroom deals, bribery, and intimidation. He wanted to shape the wizarding world from the shadows, ensuring that the old pureblood families remained at the top of the social order. Lucius's downfall began with his own arrogance. In Harry Potter's second year, seeking to discredit Arthur Weasley and dispose of a dark artifact, he planted Tom Riddle's diary on Arthur's young daughter, Ginny. He knew it was a powerful dark object, but it is unlikely he understood its full nature as a Horcrux. He saw it as a clever way to achieve two goals at once: reopening the Chamber of Secrets to purge the school of Muggleborns and framing the Weasley family for the ensuing chaos. This act of casual cruelty and political scheming backfired spectacularly. Not only did it fail, but it resulted in the destruction of one of his master's soul fragments, a crime for which he would later pay dearly. It also led to the freeing of his house elf Dobby, a deep humiliation for a man of his stature. His pivotal moral crossroads came after Voldemort's return. Lucius, who had enjoyed years of freedom and influence, was now called to account. He was no longer a powerful player in his own right. He was a terrified servant. His position in the Dark Lord's inner circle was precarious. His past failures held against him. Voldemort entrusted him with the mission of retrieving the prophecy from the Department of Mysteries. Lucius led a group of Death Eaters in this mission, but he failed again. He was outmaneuvered by a group of teenagers, and the prophecy was destroyed. This time, there was no escape. He was arrested and sent to Azkaban. His imprisonment broke him. When he was later broken out by Voldemort, he was a shadow of his former self. His fine robes were tattered, his arrogance replaced by a palpable fear. Voldemort stripped him of his wand and subjected him and his family to constant humiliation at Malfoy Manor. Lucius, the man who craved status above all else, had lost everything. He was a failure in the eyes of his master and a pariah to the rest of the world. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Lucius's only concern was for the safety of his son. He and Narcissa did not fight. They ran through the chaos, screaming Draco's name, Their ambition had been reduced from ruling the world to simply finding their child. What does Lucius's journey teach us about Slytherin values? He is a prime example of ambition for social status gone wrong. His cunning was undeniable, but it was short-sighted, often undone by his own hubris. He prioritized his reputation and his family's good name over all else, but his choices ultimately destroyed that name. He shows that the Slytherin tradition of using wealth and influence to achieve one's goals can be effective, but it is a hollow form of power. When faced with a true master of the dark arts like Voldemort, Lucius's political maneuvering was useless. He was a big fish in a small pond, who found himself completely out of his depth in the open ocean. His legacy is one of disgrace, a powerful reminder that pride, especially when unearned, often comes before a great fall. Chapter: Draco Malfoy. Few characters in the wizarding world are as complex and divisive as Draco Malfoy. For much of his story, he is the archetypal schoolyard bully, an arrogant, prejudiced tormentor who serves as a direct foil to Harry Potter. But beneath the sneering exterior lies a boy struggling under the immense weight of his family's expectations, a product of a toxic ideology who is ultimately pushed to a breaking point. His journey is a profound exploration of choice, indoctrination, and the possibility of finding one's own moral compass, even in the darkest of circumstances. Draco grew up in Malfoy Manor, a world of immense wealth and privilege. He was the only child of Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy, and he was raised to believe three things without question: that he was special, that his pure blood status made him superior to most other wizards, and that the Malfoy name was to be revered. He arrived at Hogwarts fully expecting to be the most important student in his year. His early ambition was simple: to be the center of attention, to have the best of everything, and to put his rival, Harry Potter, in his place. His early years at Hogwarts were defined by this rivalry. He mocked Harry's lack of parents, Ron's poverty, and Hermione's Muggle heritage. He was flanked by his two thuggish cronies, Crabbe and Goyle, and he used his father's influence as a school governor to make his life and the lives of his friends as difficult as possible. He was the classic Slytherin antagonist, using his cunning for petty cruelty and his status as a shield. The turning point in Draco's life came in his 6th year. Following his father's imprisonment in Azkaban, Lord Voldemort, as a punishment to the Malfoy family, gave Draco the task of killing Albus Dumbledore. He was also tasked with finding a way to smuggle Death Eaters into the heavily protected castle. At 16 years old, Draco was given a mission that seasoned dark wizards would have found daunting. He was also given the Dark Mark, a permanent brand of servitude. This assignment was his pivotal moral crossroads. The boy who had talked so casually about the dark arts and his family's connections was now faced with the terrifying reality of being a Death Eater. The task broke him. He spent the year in a state of constant fear and anxiety. He was no longer the arrogant bully. He was a terrified child, trapped in a situation far beyond his control. His attempts to fulfill his mission were clumsy and desperate. He used a cursed necklace and poisoned mead, both of which failed and nearly killed 2 innocent students. His cunning, which had served him so well in schoolyard squabbles, was not up to the task of assassination. The pressure took a visible toll. He grew thin and pale, his usual sneer replaced by a look of constant worry. He confided in moaning Myrtle, the ghost of the girl Voldemort had murdered 50 years prior, showing a vulnerability he had never shown to anyone else. The culmination of his year-long ordeal came on the top of the astronomy tower. He succeeded in smuggling the Death Eaters into the castle and managed to disarm a weakened Albus Dumbledore. He had his wand pointed at the greatest wizard of the age. He had the chance to fulfill his mission, to restore his family's honor, to save his own life, but he couldn't do it. In that moment, faced with the reality of murder, Draco hesitated. He was not a killer. Dumbledore, in his final moments, spoke to him with pity, not anger, offering him a way out, offering him protection. Before Draco could make a final choice, Severus Snape arrived and killed Dumbledore himself, fulfilling the unbreakable vow he had made to Narcissa. This moment defined the rest of Draco's journey. He had failed as a Death Eater, but he had succeeded as a human being. At Malfoy Manor, he again showed a sliver of defiance when he was asked to identify a captured and disfigured Harry Potter. He hesitated, refusing to give a definitive answer, an act that bought Harry and his friends precious time. During the Battle of Hogwarts, he was seen trying to get his wand back from Harry, but his heart was clearly not in the fight. His primary motivation seemed to be his own survival. What does Draco's journey teach us about Slytherin values? His story is a powerful critique of the house's worst tendencies. He shows how the emphasis on blood purity and family status can create a deeply prejudiced and unhappy individual. However, his story also highlights the core Slytherin instinct for self-preservation in its most profound sense. In the end, Draco chose to preserve his own soul. He was not brave in the Gryffindor sense. He did not stand up and fight. His was a quieter, more desperate form of resistance. He resisted the pressure to become a murderer. Fanfiction sidebar. The 19 years after the battle are largely a blank slate for Draco. Many fan interpretations explore his post-war path with nuance. They imagine him struggling with the legacy of his family's name, facing public scorn and his own immense guilt. In these retellings, his marriage to Astoria Greengrass, a pure-blood who held more tolerant views, is seen as a deliberate break from his parents' ideology. He is depicted as a father who is determined to raise his son Scorpius to be a better man than he was, teaching him that there is no shame in kindness and that blood status means nothing compared to character. This interpretation sees Draco's ultimate ambition not as a quest for power, but for a quiet, personal redemption. Chapter: Severus Snape. No figure in the history of Slytherin, and perhaps in the history of Hogwarts itself, is as complex, controversial, and ultimately as pivotal as Severus Snape. For years, he was seen as a cruel, vindictive potions master, a former Death Eater who held a bitter grudge against Harry Potter. But the final revelation of his story reframed everything, revealing a man of extraordinary courage, unwavering loyalty, and a love so profound it drove him to live a life of constant danger and self-sacrifice. His story is the ultimate testament to the dual nature of Slytherin, a house of both darkness and light, and a powerful lesson in the nature of bravery. Snape's early life was unhappy and loveless. He grew up in a neglectful home with feuding Muggle and magical parents. His solace was his friendship with a young girl from his neighborhood, Lily Evans. He was the one who told her she was a witch, who explained the magical world to her, and who fell deeply in love with her. She was his one true friend, the only light in his dark childhood. When they went to Hogwarts, they were separated. Lily was sorted into Gryffindor, while Snape, with his interest in the dark arts and his ambitious nature, was placed in Slytherin. At school, he was a brilliant student, particularly in potions and the dark arts, even inventing his own spells, which he recorded in his potions textbook under the moniker the Half-Blood Prince. However, he was also a social outcast, a frequent target of bullying by James Potter and Sirius Black. This torment, combined with his interest in the dark arts, pushed him further down a dark path. His friendship with Lily was strained and eventually shattered by his choices. In a moment of anger and humiliation after being bullied by James, he called Lily a mudblood. It was a word he could not take back, a reflection of the prejudiced world he was increasingly embracing. The loss of her friendship was the greatest regret of his life and set him firmly on the path to becoming a Death Eater. He sought power and belonging in the ranks of Lord Voldemort, believing in the pure-blood cause he thought would win him respect. His pivotal moral crossroads, the moment that defined the rest of his existence, came when he overheard a prophecy about a child who would have the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. Eager to curry favor, he relayed this prophecy to Voldemort. But to his horror, Voldemort interpreted the prophecy as referring to the son of Lily and James Potter. Realizing he had inadvertently marked the woman he loved for death, Snape was consumed by terror and remorse. He went to Albus Dumbledore and begged him to protect the Potters. He offered Dumbledore anything, his complete and utter loyalty, in exchange for Lily's life. Dumbledore agreed, but on one condition: Snape would have to become his spy, a double agent inside the Death Eater ranks. When Voldemort killed James and Lily but was vanquished by the infant Harry, Snape was devastated. His life's purpose was now defined by his promise to Dumbledore and his guilt over Lily's death. He would protect her son. This became his sole, all-consuming ambition. For the next 17 years, Snape played the most dangerous game imaginable. He was Dumbledore's man, through and through, but he had to maintain his cover as a loyal Death Eater. He became a professor at Hogwarts, where he could watch over Harry. His cruelty towards Harry was part of this elaborate mask. He saw in Harry a painful reminder of both the woman he loved and the man he hated. His protection was a bitter, resentful, but nonetheless absolute duty. His mastery of occlumency, the magical defense of the mind, was his signature skill, allowing him to lie to Lord Voldemort, the most accomplished legilimens of all time, for years without being discovered. His greatest act of loyalty was also his most terrible. He killed Albus Dumbledore. He did this on Dumbledore's own orders. Dumbledore was already dying from a curse, and he wanted to spare Draco Malfoy's soul from the act of murder, while also cementing Snape's position as Voldemort's most trusted servant. It was an act that made him a pariah, the ultimate villain in the eyes of the world, but it was his final, necessary sacrifice. As headmaster of Hogwarts under Voldemort's regime, he secretly worked to protect the students, walking a tightrope of deception. In his final moments, after being mortally wounded by Voldemort's snake Nagini, he gave Harry his memories. With his dying breath, he looked into Harry's eyes, Lily's eyes, and found a final peace. What does Snape's journey teach us about Slytherin values? He is the apotheosis of Slytherin cunning, resourcefulness, and ambition, all redirected for a cause of selfless love. His ambition was not for power, but for redemption. His cunning allowed him to deceive the greatest dark wizard in history. His self-preservation was not for his own life, but for the preservation of his mission. Snape proves that bravery is not about charging head first into battle. It is about enduring, about playing the long game, about making unthinkable sacrifices for a greater good that no one else can see. He was not a nice man, but he was, without question, one of the bravest men the wizarding world has ever known. His legacy is a permanent and powerful challenge to anyone who would dare to call Slytherin an evil house. Chapter: Horace Slughorn. Horace Slughorn was a man who worshipped at the altar of success. A bon vivant with a taste for crystallized pineapple and comfortable armchairs, he represented a side of Slytherin ambition that had little to do with dark magic or pure-blood fanaticism. His ambition was for comfort, influence, and the reflected glory of others. His story is a study in moral compromise, the quiet cowardice of a man who values his own safety above all else, and the eventual, surprising discovery of a courage he never knew he possessed. As head of Slytherin for many decades, Slughorn's defining characteristic was his love of collecting people. He was a master networker, the creator of the Slug Club, a coterie of students he deemed most likely to succeed. He curated his students like a collector arranging his most prized possessions, taking immense pride in their future accomplishments. An invitation to one of his exclusive dinner parties was a sign that you were destined for greatness, or at least that Slughorn thought you were. His mentorship was a form of social engineering, connecting the powerful with the promising, all to his own benefit. Slughorn was not a prejudiced man in the way that many of his Slytherin colleagues were. He valued talent and charisma far more than blood status. He was delighted to have a muggle born like Lily Evans in his club, admiring her prodigious talent for potions. His brand of Slytherin elitism was based on merit and connection, not on ancestry. His pivotal moral crossroads, and the greatest shame of his life, came from his interactions with another of his star pupils, Tom Riddle. Slughorn was utterly captivated by Riddle. He saw in him a brilliant, charming, and prodigiously talented wizard, perhaps the most talented he had ever taught. He was flattered by the boy's attention, and eager to count him among his collection of future luminaries. One evening, in the cozy intimacy of his office, a young Tom Riddle asked him about the darkest of magic, Horcruxes. Specifically, he asked about the possibility of creating more than one. Slughorn knew this was forbidden, dangerous knowledge. His initial reaction was one of shock. But under the pressure of Riddle's charm and his own desire to seem knowledgeable and helpful to his favorite student, he relented. He told Riddle what he wanted to know. He explained the theory, never imagining the monstrous use to which the boy would put it. When Riddle became Voldemort, Slughorn was horrified. He realized that he had given the most evil wizard of the age the key to immortality. Consumed by guilt and fear, Slughorn chose to hide. He retired from Hogwarts and spent years on the run, moving from one Muggle house to another, always one step ahead of the Death Eaters who sought to recruit him and the Order of the Phoenix who sought his help. His Slytherin instinct for self-preservation had kicked into overdrive. He was a coward, and he knew it. His second chance at a moral crossroads came when Albus Dumbledore and Harry Potter finally cornered him. Dumbledore needed the true memory of his conversation with Riddle. Slughorn had modified his own memory, providing a version where he rebuffed the boy, unable to face the truth of his own culpability. For months, he resisted Harry's attempts to retrieve the real memory, terrified of what it would mean for his reputation and his safety. Ultimately, it was Harry's appeal to his better nature, to his genuine affection for Lily Evans, that broke through his defenses. Harry convinced him that Lily's sacrifice would be in vain if he did not provide the key to defeating her murderer. In a moment of profound, painful courage, Slughorn gave Harry the true memory. It was the bravest thing he had ever done. But his journey was not over. After Dumbledore's death, he remained at Hogwarts, eventually taking up his old post as head of Slytherin. During the final battle, he initially seemed to evacuate with the younger students, a return to his old, cowardly ways. But then, something changed. He returned to the castle at the head of reinforcements from Hogsmeade, his wand blazing. He joined the fight, dueling his former student, Lord Voldemort, with a fury no one would have thought him capable of. What does Horace Slughorn's journey teach us about Slytherin values? He demonstrates that the Slytherin traits of networking and influence are not inherently negative, but they can lead to a shallow, self-serving existence, if not tempered by moral courage. His story is a powerful reminder that self-preservation, when taken to an extreme, becomes simple cowardice. However, his ultimate redemption shows that it is never too late to make the right choice. Slughorn, the collector of trophies, finally became a hero in his own right, proving that even the most comfort-loving, cowardly Slytherin can find their courage when the stakes are high enough. His ambition for a comfortable life was finally overshadowed by the ambition to do what was right. Chapter: Dolores Umbridge. Not all evil is grand and revolutionary. Some of it is petty, bureaucratic, and suffocatingly mundane. Dolores Jane Umbridge, a Slytherin alumna and one of the most reviled figures in modern wizarding history, is a chilling embodiment of this type of evil. She was not a Death Eater, nor did she openly serve Lord Voldemort. Her brand of darkness was one of order, control, and the systemic abuse of power, all wrapped in a sickly sweet package of pink cardigans and fluffy kittens. Her story is a crucial lesson in how Slytherin traits, when divorced from any sense of justice or empathy, can create a monster of a very different and perhaps more insidious kind. Umbridge's early life, as detailed in materials from Wizarding World, reveals the roots of her prejudice. She was the daughter of a wizard and a muggle mother, a fact she deeply resented. She despised her mother and her squib brother, and at the age of 15, she broke all ties with them, effectively erasing the impure half of her family from her life. This deep-seated self-loathing and her desperate need to prove her own magical credentials fueled her virulent anti-muggle and anti-half-breed prejudice. She was sorted into Slytherin at Hogwarts, a house that likely validated and nurtured her budding thirst for power and control. After graduating, she joined the Ministry of Magic and began a ruthlessly ambitious climb up the bureaucratic ladder. Her signature magical competencies were not in dueling, but in the magic of regulation and punishment. She was a master of rules, loopholes, and the use of institutional power to crush her opponents. Her greatest achievement was the creation of the Black Quill, a torture device that forced the user to write lines in their own blood. This was Umbridge's magic in a nutshell: cruel, invasive, and disguised as a legitimate form of discipline. Her pivotal moral crossroads was her entire career. At every step, she chose the path of greater control and cruelty. She rose to the position of Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, by playing on his fears and paranoia. She drafted legislation that was deeply prejudiced against werewolves and other part-humans, making their lives nearly impossible. When Fudge refused to believe that Voldemort had returned, Umbridge became his greatest weapon. She was installed at Hogwarts as the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, not to teach, but to act as a ministry spy and to suppress any dissent. As High Inquisitor of Hogwarts, she unleashed her full tyrannical nature. She banned student groups, monitored mail, and subjected students to her brutal detentions with the Black Quill. She sacked professors she deemed unfit and attempted to drive Dumbledore from the school. Her rule was a reign of saccharine terror, her ambition to impose her own twisted vision of order on the castle. She believed that discipline and the strict control of information were the keys to a secure society. She did not need a dark mark to prove her evil. Her educational decrees were enough. After Voldemort's successful coup of the Ministry, Umbridge found her true calling. As the head of the Muggleborn Registration Commission, she presided over kangaroo courts that stripped Muggleborn witches and wizards of their wands and their freedom, sending them to Azkaban on the false charge of having stolen their magic. She did this with a gleeful, self-righteous zeal. In a deeply symbolic act, she even took Salazar Slytherin's locket, the Horcrux, from Mundungus Fletcher, and wore it as a status symbol, claiming the S stood for Selwyn, a pure-blood family she was falsely trying to link herself to. The locket's dark magic seemed to amplify her own cruelty, but it did not create it. What does Dolores Umbridge's journey teach us about Slytherin values? She is a grotesque caricature of the desire for order and leadership. Her ambition was for bureaucratic power. Her leadership was tyranny. Her cunning was in the manipulation of rules and public opinion. She represents the danger of institutional evil, how a system can be used to persecute and harm people under the guise of law and order. She proves that one does not need to follow Lord Voldemort to be a monster. Her desire for a pure and orderly world was just as destructive as his. Umbridge is a chilling reminder that the most dangerous Slytherins are not always the ones with the masks and the curses, but sometimes the ones with the clipboards, the sweet smiles, and the unshakable belief in their own righteousness. Chapter Pansy Parkinson. In the ecosystem of Slytherin House during the era of Harry Potter, Draco Malfoy was the undisputed king, and Pansy Parkinson was his queen. She was the quintessential mean girl, a pug-faced, sharp-tongued student who led a clique of Slytherin girls and hung on Draco's every word. For much of her story, She serves as a background character, a voice of mockery and prejudice that reinforces the negative stereotypes of her house. But her final, pivotal action during the Battle of Hogwarts reveals the core of her character and provides a stark example of the Slytherin instinct for self-preservation at its most pragmatic and ruthless. Pansy's early life was likely one of pure-blood privilege, similar to Draco's. She arrived at Hogwarts with a fully formed sense of her own superiority and a deep disdain for anyone she considered beneath her, particularly Muggleborns and blood traders. Her ambition was not for grand power or dark knowledge, but for social status within the confines of her own house. She achieved this by aligning herself with the most powerful boy, Draco Malfoy, and by enforcing the social hierarchy through gossip, ridicule, and intimidation. Throughout her school years, she was a constant tormentor of Harry and his friends. She mocked Hermione's appearance, spread rumors, and generally acted as Draco's loyal cheerleader. She was a member of Dolores Umbridge's inquisitorial squad, a role she clearly relished, as it gave her a legitimate outlet for her bullying tendencies. She represented the everyday, casual cruelty that can flourish in an environment of prejudice. She was not a deep thinker or a powerful witch. She was a follower, a social climber whose identity was tied to the group she belonged to. Her relationship with Draco was central to her Hogwarts experience. She clearly had a romantic interest in him, and they even attended the Yule Ball together in their 4th year. She was one of the few people who seemed to show him genuine concern during his stressful 6th year, though it's unclear if this was from affection or a desire to maintain her proximity to power. Pansy's defining moment, her pivotal moral crossroads, came in the final hours before the Battle of Hogwarts. As Lord Voldemort's voice echoed through the Great Hall, offering to spare the school if they handed over Harry Potter, the students were frozen in a moment of terrified indecision. It was Pansy Parkinson who broke the silence. She stood up, pointed a trembling finger at Harry, and shrieked, "But he's there! Potter's there! Someone grab him!" In that single moment, Pansy's entire character was laid bare. Her action was not born of malice in the same way as Bellatrix's cruelty. It was born of pure, unadulterated fear and a brutally practical survival instinct. She was not thinking about good versus evil, or loyalty, or courage. She was thinking about the simplest, most direct way to save her own skin. Voldemort wanted Potter. Potter was right there. The logical, albeit cowardly and treacherous, solution was to give him what he wanted. Her suggestion was met with immediate and fierce resistance. The Gryffindors, Hufflepuffs, and Ravenclaws rose as one to defend Harry, turning their wands on the Slytherins. This moment triggered the evacuation of Slytherin House from the Great Hall, a decision made by Professor McGonagall to remove those who were not willing to fight. What does Pansy Parkinson's journey teach us about Slytherin values? She represents the trait of self-preservation in its most raw and unrefined form. She is not cunning in a strategic sense, she is reactionary. Her ambition is for her own safety, and she is willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to achieve it. Her actions are a stark reminder that the ends justify the means philosophy, a cornerstone of the Slytherin ethos, can lead to acts of profound betrayal when not guided by a moral compass. She is not a monster like Umbridge, or a fanatic like Bellatrix. She is something far more common, a person whose fear completely overrides their conscience. Her legacy is a single, shrill cry in the darkness, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest evil is not a grand plan, but a simple, selfish choice made in a moment of terror. Chapter: Blaise Zabini. If Draco Malfoy was the outspoken prince of Slytherin and Pansy Parkinson, his vocal courtier, Blaise Zabini was the silent, watchful duke. A figure of quiet arrogance and detached amusement, Blaise moved through the halls of Hogwarts with an air of cool indifference. He was handsome, well-connected, and seemingly unimpressed by the drama that swirled around him. His story offers a look at a different kind of Slytherin, one whose ambition is not for overt power or social dominance, but for the maintenance of a carefully constructed, sophisticated detachment. Blaze's background was one of wealth and glamour. His mother was a famously beautiful witch who had been married 7 times, each husband dying mysteriously and leaving her a vast fortune. This lineage gave Blaze an aura of dangerous sophistication. He was not a thug like Crabbe or Goyle, nor a gossip like Pansy. He was aloof, observant, and possessed a sharp, cynical intelligence. He was selected by Horace Slughorn to be a member of the Slug Club on the Hogwarts Express in his 6th year, not because of any overt action, but because of his impressive connections and his intriguing family history. His interaction with Slughorn reveals much about his character. He was polite but not fawning. He answered questions with a cool confidence and did not seem overly impressed by the invitation. He viewed the world with a critical eye, even making a cynical remark about Ginny Weasley's attractiveness, suggesting he judged people based on a very narrow and superficial set of standards. Unlike Draco, Blaze never seemed to go out of his way to antagonize Harry Potter and his friends. His prejudice was more passive, a quiet, ingrained belief in his own superiority rather than an aggressive need to prove it. He existed within the pure-blood social circles but seemed to be on the periphery, an observer rather than a key player. His ambition was not to lead the pack, but to remain comfortably above it all. His pivotal moral crossroads, like those of many of his housemates, was the Second Wizarding War. The books give us very little information about his direct involvement. He was present at the Battle of Hogwarts, but his specific actions are not detailed. It is known that he remained with the Slytherin contingent that was led out of the Great Hall before the battle began. However, some of them, including Draco Malfoy, did return later. Given his character, it is unlikely that Blaze returned to fight for either side. His primary instinct would have been self-preservation, but a more calculated and elegant version than Pansy Parkinson's panicked outburst. Blaze would not have screamed. He would have coolly assessed the situation, weighed the odds, and chosen the path that offered the greatest chance of survival with the least amount of personal risk. His loyalty was likely only to himself. He was not a fanatic. He would not have died for the Dark Lord's cause, but he also would not have risked his life to fight against it. What does Blaze Zabini's journey teach us about Slytherin values? He represents the Slytherin trait of cunning as a form of social calculus. He was constantly observing, calculating, and positioning himself to his best advantage. His self-preservation was not about raw survival, but about the preservation of his status and his detached, elegant lifestyle. He embodies a certain kind of Slytherin apathy, a belief that the squabbles of others are beneath him. Fan fiction sidebar. Many interpretations of Blaze's post-war life see him navigating the new political landscape with the same cool pragmatism he showed at school. He would not be burdened by the same public shame as the Malfoys, having never been a high-profile Death Eater. He would likely use his family's wealth and his own intelligence to secure a comfortable and influential position, perhaps in international magical affairs or luxury goods. He would remain aloof, sophisticated, and morally neutral, a survivor who always manages to land on his feet. His story is a quiet reminder that not all ambition is loud, and that sometimes the most cunning move is to stay out of the game altogether until you can be sure which side is going to win. Chapter: Theodore Nott. In the annals of Slytherin House, some figures are defined by their noise, their overt actions, and their public allegiances. Theodore Nott is defined by his silence. He is a ghost in the narrative, a student mentioned by name but rarely by action, a quiet intellectual who exists in the shadow of his Death Eater father. His story is a fascinating thought experiment on the nature of choice for a Slytherin born into darkness but possessed of a keen and independent mind. He represents the path not taken, the quiet resistance of non-participation. Theodore's father, Mr. Nott, was one of Lord Voldemort's original Death Eaters, a member of the inner circle from the very beginning. This meant that Theodore grew up in a household where loyalty to the Dark Lord was not just an ideology, but a family duty. He would have been raised on the same pure blood rhetoric as Draco Malfoy. But his response to this indoctrination was vastly different. The canonical books describe him as a clever but solitary boy. He is one of the few students who can see thestrals, meaning he has witnessed death at some point in his young life. Unlike Draco, who boasted about his father's connections and used his status as a weapon, Theodore was withdrawn and observant. He did not join Draco's gang of cronies. He was a loner, preferring his own company to the boisterous performance of his housemates. J.K. Rowling has provided additional information about him outside of the main book series, stating that Theodore was a very clever wizard who was raised by his elderly, widowed father. This solitary upbringing likely contributed to his independent nature. He did not need the validation of a peer group. He was self-contained and introspective. His pivotal moral crossroads was the rise of Voldemort and the increasing pressure on the children of Death Eaters to join the cause. While Draco was struggling with his assignment, and Crabbe and Goyle were blindly following, Theodore remained on the sidelines. He never became a Death Eater. This was a conscious choice, an act of quiet rebellion. He saw the path his father had taken, a path that led to imprisonment in Azkaban after the battle at the Department of Mysteries, and he chose differently. His ambition was not for power in Voldemort's New World Order. It was likely an ambition for knowledge, for understanding. He was an intellectual, and intellectuals are often skeptical of blind fanaticism. He possessed the Slytherin cunning to see that aligning with Voldemort was a dangerous and ultimately self-destructive path. His self-preservation was not just about physical safety, but about the preservation of his own mind and his own soul. He refused to be drawn into the madness. What does Theodore Nott's journey teach us about Slytherin values? He is a powerful example of how cunning and ambition can lead to a rejection of the house's darkest traditions. His cunning was intellectual. He was smart enough to see the flaws in Voldemort's ideology and the instability of his regime. His ambition was for a life of his own choosing, not one dictated by his father's allegiances. He demonstrates that the greatest act of self-preservation can be the simple refusal to participate in evil. Fan fiction sidebar. In the absence of canonical detail, many fan works have explored Theodore's character in depth. They often portray him as a foil to Draco, a quiet intellectual who forms an unlikely friendship with Hermione Granger, based on a shared love of knowledge. In these stories, his silence is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. He is a master of occlumency, protecting his thoughts from his father and the other Death Eaters. He secretly reads forbidden books, not on the dark arts, but on philosophy and Muggle history, trying to understand the world his father wants to destroy. His post-war life is imagined as one of quiet scholarship, perhaps becoming an unspeakable in the Department of Mysteries, or a researcher who works to undo the damage of dark magic. He is the Slytherin who chose a library over a battlefield, a path of quiet integrity in a world that demanded loud allegiances. Chapter: Crabbe and Goyle. Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle were the muscle of Draco Malfoy's Slytherin clique. For 7 years, they were almost always seen as a single unit, a pair of hulking, dim-witted bodyguards flanking their more intelligent and charismatic leader. They were followers, not leaders, their ambition seemingly limited to enjoying the status that came with being close to Draco and intimidating smaller students. But in their final year at Hogwarts, their paths diverged dramatically, revealing a crucial difference between them and providing a tragic lesson on the consequences of blind obedience. Both Crabbe and Goyle were the sons of Death Eaters, and they were raised to be loyal to the pureblood cause. They were sorted into Slytherin and immediately fell in with Draco, becoming his loyal enforcers. They were not known for their magical talent or their intelligence. In fact, their academic performance was abysmal. Their power came from their size and their willingness to use it at Draco's command. They were the fists to his sneering mouth. For most of their school careers, they were interchangeable. They followed Draco's lead in everything, from bullying Neville Longbottom to attempting to catch Harry on the Hogwarts Express. They were members of the Inquisitorial Squad, using their newfound authority to dock points from Gryffindors with glee. They seemed to lack any independent thought, their identities completely subsumed by their role as Malfoy's henchmen. Their pivotal moral crossroads came during their 7th year, after Voldemort had taken control of the school and Snape was headmaster. With Draco becoming increasingly withdrawn and fearful, the power dynamic within their small group began to shift. The Carrows, 2 sadistic Death Eater professors, were in charge of discipline, and they encouraged the practice of the dark arts. This new environment seemed to embolden Crabbe in particular. He became more defiant, more openly cruel. He was no longer just following Draco's lead. He was developing a taste for dark magic in his own right. The final dramatic divergence of their paths occurred during the Battle of Hogwarts, in the Room of Requirement. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were in the room, searching for Ravenclaw's diadem when they were cornered by Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle. In this confrontation, it was Crabbe who took the lead. He defied Draco's order to capture Harry alive, declaring his intention to kill him. He was filled with a new dark confidence, no longer content to be a mere follower. In a display of magical power far beyond anything he had ever shown before, Crabbe unleashed the Fiendfire curse, a torrent of living demonic fire. It was incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous, dark magic, and Crabbe had no control over it. The cursed fire consumed everything in the room, including, tragically, Crabbe himself. He was killed by the very dark magic he had so eagerly embraced. Goyle, in that same confrontation, was simply knocked unconscious by Hermione and was saved from the fire, along with Draco, by Harry and his friends. He survived the battle. His fate after the war unknown. What do the journeys of Crabbe and Goyle teach us about Slytherin values? They represent the danger of being a follower without a conscience. For years, their ambition was borrowed from Draco. But when the opportunity to embrace real dark power presented itself, Crabbe seized it with a terrifying eagerness. He mistook the ability to destroy for true strength. His story is a blunt and brutal lesson. The pursuit of power, without the wisdom or discipline to control it, leads only to self-destruction. Goyle, on the other hand, represents the follower who simply follows. He lacked Crabbe's sudden surge of malevolent ambition. He was a bully and a bigot, but not a killer. His survival was due to his own incompetence and the mercy of the people he had spent 7 years tormenting. Together, they are a cautionary tale about the difference between being a tool for someone else's ambition and developing a dark ambition of your own. One path may lead to a life of mediocrity, but the other can lead to a swift and fiery end. Chapter: The Death Eaters of Slytherin. Beyond the inner circle of familiar names, there was a legion of other Slytherins who answered the call of the Dark Lord. They were the foot soldiers, the lieutenants, and the true believers who formed the backbone of the Death Eater army. While they often blur into a single, menacing force, many of these individuals had their own distinct motivations and arcs, their stories contributing to the complex and bloody tapestry of the Wizarding Wars. This chapter will examine a composite of these figures, including Yaxley, the Carrows, and the Senior Knot, among others. Corban Yaxley was a prime example of a Death Eater who thrived under Voldemort's second regime. He was a powerful, intimidating wizard who seemed to be more of a true believer than a reluctant follower like Lucius Malfoy. During the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, he was one of the first to enter the castle, fighting fiercely. His ambition was clearly for power within the New World Order. After Voldemort's takeover of the Ministry, Yaxley was installed as the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. From this position, he helped to enforce Voldemort's tyrannical rule. He was a bureaucrat of evil, similar to Umbridge, but with the overt backing of the Dark Lord. He was also a skilled practitioner of the Imperious Curse, which he used to control Pius Thickness, the head of his department, effectively making him a puppet minister. Yaxley represents the Slytherin, who is cunning enough to see how to gain power within a changing political system, and ruthless enough to do whatever is necessary to hold on to it. Amicus and Alecto Caro were siblings who represented the sadistic, thuggish element of the Death Eaters. They were not subtle or political. Their specialty was cruelty. After Voldemort took control of Hogwarts, he appointed them as professors. Amicus taught what was formerly Defense Against the Dark Arts, which he renamed simply the Dark Arts, teaching students how to perform curses on their disobedient classmates. Alecto taught Muggle studies from a purely propagandistic viewpoint, portraying Muggles as subhuman animals. They ruled the school through fear and violence, their tenure marked by the torture of students. They represent the Slytherin traits of ambition and leadership, twisted into their most brutish and degraded form. They had no grand strategy. Their ambition was simply the freedom to inflict pain. Mr. Nott, Theodore Nott's father, was one of the original Death Eaters, a member of Voldemort's inner circle from the First War. He was a widower and an old, loyal servant. He managed to evade Azkaban after Voldemort's first fall, but he answered the call immediately upon his master's return. He was present at the battle in the Department of Mysteries, where he was injured and subsequently arrested and imprisoned. Nott Sr. represents the Old Guard, the true believer whose loyalty to the pure-blood cause was absolute. His ambition was for the restoration of the world he believed in, a world ruled by ancient families like his own. He is a figure of ideological conviction, a man who passed his dark legacy, though not his fanaticism, down to his son. Other names from the Slytherin ranks fill out the picture. Avery and Mulciber were also among the first Death Eaters, friends of Snape's at school who tried to recruit him. They were part of the group that attacked the Weasleys at the Quidditch World Cup, and they fought in the Department of Mysteries. Travers was a Death Eater who was responsible for the murders of the McKinnon family. Rosier and Wilkes were two others from Snape's generation, both killed by Aurors before the end of the First War. These figures, while not as prominent, show the depth and breadth of Slytherin involvement in Voldemort's cause. What does this composite picture of the Death Eaters teach us about Slytherin House? It shows that the house was not a monolith of evil, but it was a uniquely fertile ground for Voldemort's recruitment. He appealed to different Slytherin traits in different people. He appealed to the political ambition of men like Yaxley, the sadistic cruelty of the Caros, the ideological fervor of men like Nott Sr., and the simple desire for power and belonging in countless others. The common thread is the ends justify the means philosophy. For all of them, the goal of a purified wizarding world, ruled by the powerful, was worth any price, any cruelty, any betrayal. They are the dark reflection of the house's potential, a permanent stain on its long and complex history. Chapter: Andromeda Black Tonks. In the story of the noble and most ancient House of Black, a family obsessed with blood purity, Andromeda Tonks, born Andromeda Black, is a figure of quiet, revolutionary courage. She was the middle sister, sandwiched between the fanatical Bellatrix and the pragmatic Narcissa. While her sisters made choices that kept them within the gilded cage of pure-blood society, Andromeda made a choice for love, a choice that cost her everything but ultimately saved her soul. Her story is a vital counterpoint to the dark legacy of her family, a testament to the fact that a Slytherin's loyalty can be given to a person, not just to an ideology. Andromeda was sorted into Slytherin at Hogwarts, a testament to her ambition and cunning. She grew up in the same oppressive environment as her sisters, steeped in the doctrine of pure-blood supremacy. She would have been expected to make an advantageous marriage to a fellow pureblood, just as her sisters did. But at Hogwarts, she fell in love with a Muggle-born student named Ted Tonks. This was her pivotal moral crossroads. To pursue a relationship with Ted was to defy every principle her family stood for. It was to invite disownment, to be cast out from the only world she had ever known. In the eyes of her family, it was the ultimate betrayal, a deliberate pollution of their sacred bloodline. Andromeda had to choose between the family she was born into and the family she wanted to create. She chose love. She married Ted Tonks, and as expected, she was immediately disowned by the House of Black. Her name was blasted from the family tapestry at Grimmauld Place. To her sister Bellatrix, she became a mortal enemy, a filthy blood traitor. Even her relationship with Narcissa, to whom she had been close, became strained and distant. She gave up wealth, status, and family for a life with the man she loved. This act was not one of impulsive Gryffindor-style rebellion. It would have required immense cunning and careful planning. She would have had to navigate her family's suspicions and plan her departure, knowing that there would be no going back. It was a strategic choice, a calculated risk for a different kind of life. Andromeda and Ted built a happy life together. They had a daughter, Nymphadora Tonks, a bright, bubbly witch who became a metamorph magus and an auror. Andromeda raised her daughter to be brave, tolerant, and kind, the very opposite of the values she had been taught as a child. While she was not an active member of the Order of the Phoenix in the First War, she and her family were allies, living on the periphery of the conflict. During the Second War, her home became a safe house for the Order. She helped protect Harry Potter after the Battle of the Seven Potters. But the war brought her immense tragedy. Her husband, Ted, was murdered by Snatchers while on the run for being a Muggle-born. Her daughter, Nymphadora, and her son-in-law, Remus Lupin, were both killed in the Battle of Hogwarts. In the aftermath of the war, Andromeda, having lost her entire family, was left to raise her orphaned grandson, Teddy Lupin. What does Andromeda's journey teach us about Slytherin values? She redefines them. Her ambition was not for power or status, but for personal happiness and freedom. Her cunning was used not to dominate others, but to escape a toxic and oppressive environment. Her greatest loyalty was not to a house or a bloodline, but to her own heart and the family she chose to build. Andromeda proves that the core traits of a Slytherin can be used to forge a path of compassion and integrity. She is the Slytherin who shed the skin of her upbringing, who chose a different, braver path. Her legacy is a quiet but powerful statement that our origins do not have to be our destiny, and that the greatest strength can be found in the courage to love, even when the world demands that you hate. Chapter Merlin. In the vast tapestry of wizarding history, no name shines brighter than that of Merlin. The most famous wizard of all time, his legend has echoed through centuries, a symbol of immense power used for the cause of justice and unity. He is the archetype of the wise and powerful wizard, the mentor to King Arthur, the architect of the Knights of the Round Table. And according to modern lore from the wizarding world, this paragon of magical virtue was a member of Slytherin House. This association, at first glance, seems paradoxical. How could the wizard, who championed a code of chivalry and worked to unite the magical and muggle worlds, have come from the house of the famously prejudiced Salazar Slytherin? To understand this, we must separate the historical Merlin from the legendary figure and consider what his association says about the true nature of Slytherin ambition. The historical Merlin lived in the medieval era, sometime after the founding of Hogwarts. The details of his life are shrouded in myth. What is known is that he was a wizard of unparalleled power and vision. He believed passionately in the rights of Muggles and sought to create a world where the two communities could live in peace. He founded the Order of Merlin, an organization dedicated to this cause, which handed out rules against using magic on Muggles. This ideology is, of course, the polar opposite of Salazar Slytherin's philosophy. So why would Merlin be sorted into Slytherin? The answer lies in the nature of his ambition. Merlin's ambition was colossal. He did not just want to be a powerful wizard. He wanted to reshape the entire social and political landscape of his time. He wanted to build a new world order, a unified kingdom of Britain under King Arthur, where justice and equality prevailed. This is an ambition of staggering scale, a goal that would require immense cunning, political maneuvering, and a ruthless determination to succeed. These are the core traits of a Slytherin. Merlin was not a naive idealist. He was a master strategist, a political operator who used his magic and his intelligence to guide a young king, unite warring factions, and outwit his enemies. He understood power, and he knew how to wield it. The stories of his magical feats, from shape-shifting to prophecy, paint a picture of a wizard who had mastered the deepest and most complex forms of magic. His goals may have been noble, but his methods were undoubtedly cunning and resourceful. His placement in Slytherin forces us to reconsider the house's defining characteristics. It suggests that the house is not inherently about pure blood supremacy or dark magic. It is about the scale and nature of one's ambition. A Gryffindor might charge into battle to save a village. A Slytherin like Merlin would seek to build a kingdom where villages no longer need saving. A Gryffindor acts on brave impulse. A Slytherin acts on a grand, long-term strategy. What does Merlin's legacy teach us about Slytherin values? He is the ultimate example of Slytherin potential realized for the greater good. He embodies ambition as a force for positive, systemic change. His cunning was used not for personal gain, but for the creation of a more just society. His leadership inspired a generation of knights and shaped a national identity. His story is a powerful reminder that the traits of a Slytherin are tools. In the hands of Salazar, they were used to build walls of division and fear. In the hands of Voldemort, they were used to build an empire of death and terror. But in the hands of Merlin, they were used to build a Camelot. He is the proof of concept, the shining ideal that demonstrates what a Slytherin can achieve when their great ambition is guided by a noble purpose. He is the Serpent of wisdom, not the Serpent of temptation, a permanent and powerful counter-narrative to the darkest elements of his house's history. Part 7. Wars, Defeats, and Redemptions. The two great wizarding wars of the 20th century were defining moments for the entire magical community, but they placed Slytherin House in a unique and devastating position. The House of Salazar Slytherin became both the crucible and the headquarters for Lord Voldemort's Dark Revolution. Its dungeons, once a sanctuary for the ambitious, became a breeding ground for intolerance and a command center for terror. But even in its darkest hour, the house was not a monolith. It was a place of internal conflict, of terrified silence, and of quiet, unexpected acts of redemption. During the First Wizarding War, from roughly 1970 to 1981, Slytherin House was deeply implicated in Voldemort's rise. The majority of his Death Eaters were Slytherin alumni, drawn from the pure blood families that had long dominated the house. They saw Voldemort as the heir of Slytherin in both blood and spirit, the leader who would finally realize their founder's vision of a purified wizarding world. For these individuals, the war was a glorious crusade. However, many Slytherin students and families were caught in the middle. They may have held prejudiced views and believed in pure blood superiority, but they were not prepared for the brutal reality of Voldemort's methods. They were businessmen, politicians, and socialites, not soldiers. They were forced to choose a side, and for many, the choice was made for them. To defy Voldemort was to risk the lives of their families. The Slytherin instinct for self-preservation led many to offer their tacit support, or at least their silence, as a means of survival. This was the era of Lucius Malfoy's ascendancy, a time when influence and quiet support were often more valuable to the Dark Lord than overt violence. The 14 years of peace after Voldemort's first fall were a time of denial for many in the house. Families like the Malfoys successfully rebranded themselves as victims, claiming to have been under the imperious curse. The house's reputation, though tarnished, was largely restored in the eyes of a wizarding world that was desperate to believe the nightmare was over. The Second Wizarding War beginning with Voldemort's return in 1995, was far more direct and brutal, and it ripped Slytherin House apart. Voldemort made Malfoy Manor his headquarters, and the children of his followers at Hogwarts were now expected to take an active role. Draco Malfoy's assignment to kill Dumbledore was a clear signal. The time for passive support was over. The children were now soldiers. This created a profound schism within the house. There were those, like Crabbe, who eagerly embraced the new regime of violence and dark magic. There were those, like Draco, who were terrified and broken by the demands placed upon them. And there were those, like Theodore Nott and Blaise Zabini, who tried to remain neutral, to keep their heads down and survive. The common room, once a place of unified ambition, became a landscape of fear, suspicion, and shifting allegiances. The Battle of Hogwarts was the house's moment of ultimate crisis. When Pansy Parkinson screamed for Harry to be handed over, she spoke for the terrified, self-interested faction of the house. The subsequent evacuation of the Slytherin students from the Great Hall was seen by many as an act of collective cowardice and betrayal. And for many, it was. They had no interest in dying for a cause they did not fully believe in, nor in fighting against the families and the leader they had been taught to revere. But the story did not end there. In the final hour of the battle, a crucial act of redemption occurred. Horace Slughorn, the epitome of self-serving Slytherin comfort, returned. And he did not return alone. He brought with him the parents and shopkeepers of Hogsmeade, a citizen army to reinforce the beleaguered defenders of the castle. This was a pivotal moment. Ahead of Slytherin, leading a charge against his own former student, the darkest wizard the house had ever produced. Following Slughorn's lead, a contingent of the older Slytherin students who had evacuated also returned to fight. The books note that they returned to join the battle on the side of Hogwarts. This was a profound choice. They were not just fighting against Voldemort. They were fighting alongside the Gryffindors, Hufflepuffs, and Ravenclaws they had spent their entire lives despising. They were choosing the wizarding world over their own house's dark legacy. The war ended with 3 Slytherins dueling Lord Voldemort himself, Slughorn, McGonagall, and Kingsley Shacklebolt. It ended with Narcissa Malfoy's lie, an act of maternal love that sealed the Dark Lord's fate. It ended with Severus Snape's memories, the final key that allowed Harry Potter to win. The defeat of Voldemort was not just a victory for the good houses. It was a victory that was enabled by the choices of key Slytherins. The house that had birthed the darkness also provided some of the most crucial instruments of its destruction. The war forced every member of the house to confront the true meaning of their values. And in the end, enough of them chose to redefine ambition as the desire for a better world, cunning as the courage to deceive a tyrant, and self-preservation as the fight for a future where everyone, not just the pure-blooded, could be safe. The redemption of Slytherin House did not happen overnight, but its seeds were sown in the fire and chaos of that final battle. Part 8. Post-War Reforms and the Modern House. The fall of Lord Voldemort at the Battle of Hogwarts was a seismic event that reshaped the entire wizarding world. For Slytherin House, it was a moment of profound reckoning. Their name was synonymous with the defeated regime. Their common room had been the enemy's headquarters. Their founder's ideology had been twisted into a doctrine of genocide. In the immediate aftermath of the war, to be a Slytherin was to be viewed with suspicion, hatred, and contempt. The house was at a crossroads. It could either wither under the weight of its dark legacy or begin the long, difficult process of shedding its skin. The post-war reforms began subtly, not with grand decrees, but with small, personal choices. Draco Malfoy's distant but civil nod to Harry Potter on platform 9 3/4, 19 years later, was a symbol of this quiet change. It was an acknowledgement of a shared, traumatic past and a mutual, unspoken agreement to move forward. The old schoolyard animosity had been burned away by the fires of war, replaced by a weary understanding. The attitudes of the Sorting Hat itself seemed to shift. For centuries, it had placed students with a certain set of traits into Slytherin, often reinforcing the house's isolation. But in the post-war era, the lines began to blur. Albus Severus Potter, the son of Harry Potter, was terrified of being sorted into Slytherin. His father's reassurance to him was a revolutionary statement. Albus Severus, you were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew. This was a public reframing of the house's legacy, an acknowledgement from the wizarding world's greatest hero that Slytherin was not inherently evil. When Albus was indeed sorted into Slytherin, it was a powerful signal that the house was changing, that it was no longer solely the domain of pure-blood fanatics. The leadership within the house also played a crucial role. Horace Slughorn, who continued as head of house for a time, likely emphasized his own wartime heroism and the importance of using one's connections for good. Subsequent heads of house would have been faced with the task of actively dismantling the prejudice culture that had festered for so long. The curriculum itself would have changed. Muggle studies would no longer be a propaganda piece, but a genuine attempt to foster understanding. History of magic lessons would have to grapple honestly with the role Slytherin House played in the 2 wizarding wars. The goal was to guide the ambitious toward leadership without cruelty. The new Slytherin ethos would teach that true power comes not from domination, but from influence, innovation, and strategic thinking applied to constructive ends. A modern, healthy Slytherin ethos would look something like this. Ambition would be reframed as the drive to excel, to be the best in one's chosen field, whether that be potions, politics, or Quidditch. It would be the desire to build, to create, to solve complex problems. Cunning would be taught as strategic thinking, the ability to see all the angles, to anticipate consequences, and to find clever solutions to difficult challenges. It would be the cunning of a diplomat, not a conspirator. Leadership would be defined as the ability to inspire and organize, to build effective teams, and to make difficult decisions under pressure. It would be leadership that is earned through competence, not inherited through blood. Resourcefulness would be celebrated as the ability to make the most of what you have, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to overcome obstacles through ingenuity. And self-preservation would be understood not just as personal survival, but as the preservation of one's integrity, one's community, and the shared values of a peaceful wizarding world. The modern Slytherin house would still be a competitive and ambitious place. The rivalry with Gryffindor would likely persist, but perhaps with less vitriol, more like the rivalry between 2 top sports teams. The students would still be taught to be proud of their house, but their pride would be rooted in the legacy of Merlin, not Salazar. They would be the house of strategists, of innovators, of leaders who understand that true greatness is about building a lasting legacy, not a fleeting empire. The Serpent would finally shed the skin of its darkest history. It would remain a symbol of power and cunning, but it would also become a symbol of transformation and renewal. The journey would be long, and the shadows of the past would never completely disappear. But by confronting its own history, by choosing to redefine its own values, Slytherin House could finally step out of the dungeons and into the light, ready to forge a new legacy for a new century. Epilogue. The Serpent sheds its skin. We return, at the end of our journey, to the room deep beneath the lake. The green-silver light still filters through the enchanted glass, illuminating the faces of a new generation of students. They are the children of the post-war world, the heirs to a legacy of both shame and sacrifice. The fire still crackles in the hearth. The serpent still stands guard in silver and emerald. The ambition in this room is just as potent as it was 1,000 years ago. The question is, what has changed? We began by asking what it costs to want more, and what happens when that ambition is aimed toward different ends. The history of Slytherin House is a long and complex answer to that question. It has shown us that ambition, in its purest form, is a neutral force. It is the engine of progress, the fire that drives us to be more than we are. But like any powerful tool, its impact is determined by the hand that wields it. For Salazar Slytherin, ambition was a shield, a desperate attempt to protect his world from what he feared. But his fear poisoned his ambition, turning a desire for safety into a doctrine of exclusion that would echo for a millennium. His legacy is a stark warning that even noble goals can be corrupted by prejudiced means. For Lord Voldemort, ambition was a cage. His fear of death, the most human fear of all, became a monstrous obsession. He sought to conquer his own mortality, and in doing so, he sacrificed his own soul, piece by piece. His story shows us ambition at its most selfish and destructive, a black hole that consumes all light and leaves nothing but ruin in its wake. He is the ultimate price of greatness, when greatness is defined only as the preservation of the self. But the story does not end there. For every Voldemort, there is a Regulus Black, whose ambition to serve was transformed into a quiet, heroic ambition to defy. For every Bellatrix Lestrange, there is an Andromeda Tonks, who channeled the fierce loyalty of her bloodline into a revolutionary love. For every Lucius Malfoy, whose ambition for status crumbled into dust, there is a Narcissa Malfoy, whose ambition to protect her child proved more powerful than the Dark Lord himself. And then there is Merlin, the great ideal, the wizard whose ambition was so vast it encompassed an entire kingdom, seeking not to rule but to unite. And Severus Snape, the most complex serpent of all, whose ambition for redemption led him down a path of such profound self-sacrifice that he redefined the meaning of bravery. These figures teach us the most important lesson of all, that Slytherin is not a sentence. It is a starting point. It is a set of tools, a way of seeing the world. The students in this common room today have inherited all of it, the darkness and the light. They have the capacity for great cruelty, but also for profound, strategic heroism. The serpent sheds its skin not to become a different creature, but to grow. The modern House of Slytherin is not about erasing its past. It is about understanding it, learning from it, and choosing to grow beyond its most toxic elements. It is about embracing the ambition of Merlin over the paranoia of Salazar. It is about recognizing that true power lies not in purity of blood, but in purity of purpose. The whispers in this room are still of greatness, but perhaps the definition of greatness has changed. Perhaps it is no longer just about power and victory, but about influence and innovation. Perhaps it is about the cunning to build bridges, not just walls. Perhaps it is about the leadership to create a future that is better for everyone, not just for a chosen few. The history of House Slytherin is not over. A new chapter is being written every day, in the choices of every student who wears the silver and green. The price of greatness will always be high. It demands sacrifice, determination, and a willingness to make difficult choices. But the story of the serpent has taught us that the greatest ambition of all is the ambition to be better than those who came before. And that is a legacy worth